If you were standing on the edge of the known world, staring into the deep blue emptiness of the ocean, you would assume it is random, chaotic, and untouched. Endless water. No structure. No order. Just nature. But what if that assumption is wrong? Because hidden beneath the surface of our planet, something was discovered that should not exist at all. A perfect grid. Not a natural formation. Not erosion. Not chance. A structure so precise, so geometrically controlled, that it appears almost engineered. Massive lines stretch across the ocean floor, forming right angles, intersections, and repeating rectangular shapes. Some estimates suggest it spans nearly 60 miles in width and over 65 miles in length. A scale so large that it cannot be seen from the human eye at sea level, only revealed through satellite mapping and sonar imaging. At first, experts dismissed it as a mistake, a glitch in data, overlapping scans from different mapping systems. Ocean floor imaging is known for distortion after all. Shadows, compression errors, and signal noise can easily create illusions of structure where none exist. But this was different. When researchers began isolating the data layer by layer, the pattern remained. Clean, consistent, repeating. No distortion could fully erase it. And the more they looked, the more disturbing it became. Because this wasn't just a grid. There were variations within it. Smaller square formations nested inside larger ones. Sharp turns that resembled intersections. Pathways that looked disturbingly similar to roads or ancient road systems. Some areas even appeared to form clustered zones, almost like districts or plotted sections of land. It was as if something had once existed here, something organized, something built. But that idea raises a question that no one can comfortably answer. Who or what could have built anything on the ocean floor? Modern science tells us that the deep ocean is one of the least explored regions on Earth. Pressure alone would crush most structures. Over time, tectonic movement and sediment would erase nearly all signs of precise design. And yet, this pattern survives in the data, as if the ocean itself has refused to forget it. Some researchers suggest natural geological processes could create grid-like illusions under very specific conditions. Fractured basalt formations, tectonic stress lines, even ancient lava flows cooling in geometric fractures. But none of those explanations fully match what is being observed here. The angles are too precise, the spacing too consistent. Nature rarely produces perfect right angles over such vast distances. And when it does, it is usually local, not spanning tens of miles in a structured repetition. Then came something even more unsettling. Similar patterns began appearing in other parts of the world's oceans. Different regions, different depths, but the same underlying geometry. Lines, boxes, order hidden beneath chaos. Independent discoveries began to surface in online discussions, with amateur explorers and researchers pointing to anomalies scattered across global seabed maps. At this point, the conversation shifted from coincidence to possibility. Could these be remnants of ancient geography, long submerged by rising sea levels? Could they represent prehistoric land formations, erased by time and water? Or is there something even more difficult to accept? A growing number of voices began to suggest the idea no one wanted to say aloud, that perhaps this was not natural at all, that it could be evidence of something artificial, something far older than recorded history, something that existed before the oceans reached their current levels. But even that theory has problems. Because if something like this existed on dry land before being submerged, we would expect traces of civilization, artifacts, material remains, signs of life. Yet nothing has been recovered that directly connects to this formation. Only the pattern remains. Silent, perfect, unexplained. Government agencies and major research institutions have not officially commented on the anomaly in detail. Some say it is due to lack of funding for deep ocean exploration. Others suggest it simply does not fall within priority research zones. But for those who have seen the data, silence feels less like indifference and more like avoidance. And so the mystery remains. A vast, geometric structure hidden beneath kilometers of ocean water, too precise to ignore, too large to easily explain, and too persistent across datasets to simply dismiss. We are left with a haunting possibility that beneath the waves, in a place we barely understand, something may still be waiting to be explained. Or worse, something may have already been forgotten. Deep beneath the cold, shifting waters of the Baltic Sea, something was found that should have stayed hidden forever. At first, it was just another routine scan. A Swedish ocean exploration team, mapping the seafloor in search of shipwrecks and lost cargo, expected nothing unusual. The Baltic is known for its silence, its sediment, its history buried under centuries of darkness. But what came back on their sonar screens was not a wreck. It was something else. A shape, perfectly formed, symmetrical, resting on the ocean floor like an object that had no business being there. At first glance, it looked like a massive disk, nearly circular, smooth edges, a raised structure in the center, almost like a dome or cockpit. The image was faint, distorted by water and sonar reflection, but unmistakable in its geometry. This was not natural terrain. The team paused the scan and ran it again. Same result. They adjusted the equipment, changed angles, recalibrated filters designed to remove false positives. And still, the object remained. Solid, defined, real. It became known later as the Baltic Sea Anomaly. And from that moment, everything changed. Estimates placed the structure at roughly 60 meters in diameter, large enough to dwarf most known underwater formations in the region. Its shape resembled something deliberately constructed rather than formed through geological processes. Some described it as a crashed object. Others cautiously avoided any interpretation at all. But the most disturbing detail was not its shape. It was its position. The object appeared to sit atop what looked like a long, unnatural trail on the seabed. A drag mark, as if it had moved into place or been placed there with force. That single detail sparked a wave of speculation that would spread far beyond the scientific community. Was it a shipwreck unlike any other? A glacial formation carved into illusion? Or something that challenges the limits of what we think is possible? As the data circulated online, theories multiplied rapidly. Some suggested it was a natural rock formation shaped by glacial activity during the last ice age. The Baltic region has seen enormous geological changes over thousands of years, with retreating glaciers carving strange patterns into stone. But when geologists examined the structure more closely, they found inconsistencies. The symmetry was too balanced, the edges too smooth. Natural erosion rarely produces such uniform shapes, especially not with a central raised formation that appears intentionally centered. Others proposed it could be a sunken military structure, possibly from World War II. The Baltic Sea is known to hold thousands of wrecks and remnants from wartime activity. Submarines, mines, and collapsed vessels are not uncommon. But again, something didn't fit. No known military design matched the proportions or layout of the anomaly. No records, no blueprints, no lost technology resembled what was being seen in the sonar imagery. And then came the deeper question. If it is not natural, and not man-made from known history, then what is it? Some researchers cautiously suggested the possibility of an unknown ancient structure, a civilization lost beneath rising sea levels, a reminder of a forgotten chapter of human history erased by time and water. But this idea introduces another problem. No artifacts have been recovered nearby. No pottery, no tools, no organic material that would confirm human presence. Just the structure itself, sitting in silence at the bottom of the sea, as if it arrived without leaving a trace. Even more unsettling are the reports from diving attempts. When small expeditions approached the anomaly, they claimed unusual equipment interference, compasses behaving erratically, electrical devices failing at unexpected distances, communication signals weakening near the site. Some divers described an uneasy feeling, as if the water itself felt different around the structure. None of these accounts have been officially verified in full detail, but they continue to circulate among researchers who have studied the data. Over time, the Baltic Sea Anomaly became more than just a sonar image. It became a symbol of unanswered questions. Why does it exist? How long has it been there? And why does it resemble something that feels intentionally designed, yet completely unplaceable in our understanding of history? Satellite imagery, sonar scans, and underwater mapping have not provided a final answer. In fact, the more data that emerges, the more complex the mystery becomes. Some experts now avoid definitive statements altogether, choosing instead to classify it as an unidentified geological formation. A label that explains nothing, but satisfies procedural requirements. But labels do not erase curiosity, and they do not silence speculation. Because in the depths of the Baltic Sea, something still rests in the dark. Silent, unmoving, unexplained. And every new scan raises the same unsettling thought. What if we are not the first to discover it? What if we are simply the first to remember it? If you were to turn off every engine on Earth, every ship, every machine, every signal, and listen only to the ocean, you would expect silence. But in 1997, the silence broke. Deep beneath the surface of the Pacific, hydrophones deployed by scientists picked up something impossible. A sound so powerful, so low, and so vast that it traveled thousands of kilometers across the ocean. They called it the bloop. At first, it was just a spike on a graph. A sudden massive wave of acoustic energy captured by underwater monitoring systems. But when researchers isolated the signal and replayed it, they realized this was not ordinary ocean noise. It had structure. It rose sharply, peaked, then slowly faded, as if something enormous had moved through the water itself. And the most disturbing detail was not its volume. It was its origin. The signal came from a remote region of the South Pacific, far from shipping lanes, far from known geological activity, and far from any human presence capable of producing such a sound. Naturally, scientists began with standard explanations: underwater earthquakes, icebergs cracking, volcanic activity beneath the seabed. These are common sources of low-frequency ocean sounds. The Earth is not silent, and the ocean constantly shifts, fractures, and releases energy. But none of these explanations fully matched what was recorded, because the bloop was too loud. Much louder than any known icequake or tectonic movement at the time. The energy required to produce such a sound would have to come from something massive, something on a scale that defies typical oceanic events. That single realization pushed the mystery into deeper territory. To match the acoustic signature of the bloop, scientists estimated that the source would need to be something far larger than any known marine creature. Not just large, but enormous. Some early comparisons suggested a body size greater than the largest known whales by a wide margin. And that is where imagination began to take over. Could there be unknown life in the deep ocean? Creatures so large and so rare that they have never been observed? After all, we have explored less than a fraction of the deep sea. Vast regions remain completely untouched by human technology. But even within that possibility, the bloop created tension, because no known biological system produces sound like that. Not at that scale, not with that intensity, and not in that isolated single burst pattern. Then came another layer to the mystery. Years after the original detection, researchers re-examined the data using improved equipment. They refined the signal, filtered noise, and compared it with other ocean recordings. What they found did not fully resolve the mystery. Instead, it shifted it. Some analysts suggested the sound was consistent with massive ice movement, specifically deep underwater ice fractures. Large ice sheets cracking and shifting can produce powerful acoustic waves that travel long distances underwater. This became the official explanation for a time. But even that conclusion had problems. Because the location of the bloop did not align cleanly with known ice activity zones, and the energy profile still felt exaggerated compared to typical ice quakes. Then, something strange happened. A second signal was detected. It occurred in 1999, recorded by multiple hydrophone arrays across the Pacific. Similar structure, similar pattern, but slightly different in tone. This one was nicknamed the Julia sound. Unlike the bloop, which was a sudden burst, the Julia sound had a more continuous, almost rhythmic quality. Some described it as a low-frequency moan traveling through the water. Again, theories appeared immediately. Ice movement, geological shifting, oceanic pressure changes. But the repetition of a similar phenomenon raised uncomfortable questions. Was this just coincidence? Or was something happening repeatedly in a region of the ocean we barely understand? As discussions continued, the mystery began to drift into darker corners of speculation. Some suggested unknown marine life, deep ocean ecosystems still hidden beneath kilometers of water, creatures adapted to extreme pressure, lightless environments, and vast distances. Others went further. They connected the sound to folklore, ancient myths of sea monsters, and unexplored trenches where pressure reaches unimaginable levels. In those depths, the ocean becomes an alien world. And in alien worlds, unknown things might exist. But there is no evidence. Only sound. Only recordings. Only questions. NASA's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration eventually leaned toward the icequake explanation, stating that the most likely cause was large-scale ice movement in remote polar regions. But even that conclusion did not end the conversation. Because science does not always close mysteries neatly. Sometimes it only narrows them. And narrowing still leaves room for doubt. What makes the bloop so haunting is not just its volume or origin. It is the fact that it was never fully repeated in the same way again. A single moment, a single signal, a single burst of impossible energy from somewhere deep beneath the ocean's surface. And then, nothing. Silence returned to the depths. But silence in the ocean is never truly empty. It is only waiting for the next sound that cannot be explained. In 1999, deep beneath the vast and indifferent surface of the Pacific Ocean, something strange was recorded. It did not announce itself. There was no warning, no disturbance on the surface, no visible sign that anything was happening at all. Just data. A faint signal captured by underwater hydrophone arrays designed to listen to the hidden language of the sea. At first, it looked like noise. Ocean static. The kind of background chaos scientists filter out every day. But when they isolated the frequency and cleaned the signal, it became something else entirely. Structured. Deliberate. Almost alive. They called it the Julia sound. Unlike the earlier bloop event, which exploded suddenly across sensors like a violent pulse, this new sound behaved differently. It was continuous, sustained, a low humming presence that stretched across time rather than erupting in a single moment. And that alone changed everything. Because nature does not usually sustain a single coherent tone across vast distances without decay. Sound in the ocean scatters, absorbs, and fractures. Yet this signal remained intact far longer than it should have. As researchers examined it more closely, the unease grew. The Julia Sound was not random. It had layers. Beneath the low-frequency base was a secondary pattern, subtle fluctuations, almost like breathing, or a slow rhythmic modulation that suggested repetition. That detail shifted the conversation from geology to something far more uncertain. Could this be a natural phenomenon behaving in a way we do not yet understand? Or was it something we were not meant to interpret so easily? Theories began to circulate almost immediately. Some scientists suggested underwater volcanic activity. The Pacific Ring of Fire is one of the most geologically active regions on Earth, filled with shifting plates, deep sea vents, and erupting underwater formations. These processes can create unusual acoustic signatures. But when they mapped the signal's origin, something did not align. There was no recorded volcanic eruption in that region at the time. No seismic activity strong enough to produce such a consistent and structured sound. Others proposed a more grounded explanation: ice movement. Massive underwater ice fractures, similar to those theorized in the Bloop explanation, can generate prolonged acoustic waves. But again, the location made this difficult to justify. The signal did not originate from polar ice zones. It came from open ocean, far from land, far from ice sheets, far from anything expected. That left a gap. And into that gap, imagination quietly stepped in. The idea of unknown marine life resurfaced. Not just large animals, but intelligent or semi-intelligent systems operating in the deep ocean. Ecosystems so isolated and so vast that we have never observed them directly. The ocean, after all, remains one of the least explored regions on Earth. We have mapped the surface of Mars in greater detail than the deep sea, but even that explanation struggled to hold the weight of the Julia Sound. Because biological systems, even massive ones, do not typically produce sustained, low-frequency, perfectly stable acoustic waves over long durations without variation or collapse. Life is chaotic, organic, irregular. The Julia Sound was not. It was steady, controlled, almost mechanical. That word alone pushed the mystery into uncomfortable territory. Mechanical implies design, structure, purpose. And if something mechanical exists deep beneath the ocean where no machines are known to operate, then the question becomes far more unsettling than anyone wants to admit. But scientists do not jump to conclusions easily. So they returned to data. They analyzed waveforms, compared them with known oceanic signatures, filtered environmental interference, cross-referenced seismic logs, weather patterns, and shipping routes. And still, the signal resisted classification. It did not match known categories. Not earthquakes, not ice, not volcanic activity, not human machinery. It existed in a space between definitions. And that is where real scientific discomfort begins. Because when something cannot be categorized, it forces a choice. Either expand the understanding of what is possible, or assume the data is flawed. Many chose the second option. They argued that sensor interference, overlapping waveforms, or distant environmental noise could have created a false pattern, a coincidence amplified by imperfect technology. But even skeptics could not fully dismiss one detail: the consistency. The Julia Sound did not behave like random noise. It had a repeating structure that persisted long enough to be recorded clearly across multiple devices. And when multiple independent systems agree on a pattern, coincidence becomes harder to defend. Still, no physical source was ever confirmed. No expedition was sent directly to the origin point with sufficient depth capability to investigate fully. The ocean at those depths is unforgiving. Pressure increases to crushing levels. Visibility drops to near zero. Communication becomes unreliable. So the Julia Sound remained where it began: in data, in records, in unanswered questions. Over time, interest faded in official channels. The signal became a footnote in oceanographic studies, a curiosity, a case without resolution. But in independent research communities and online discussions, it never disappeared. It evolved. Some linked it to the earlier Bloop recording, suggesting a possible pattern across time. Others connected it to broader theories of deep ocean anomalies, proposing that the ocean may contain unknown structures or systems capable of generating organized sound. A few even went further, suggesting that these signals might not originate from Earth at all. But there is no evidence for that. Only interpretation. Only speculation. What remains undeniable is that the Julia Sound exists in recorded history as an anomaly that refuses to settle into explanation. It is too structured to be random, too isolated to be common, and too consistent to ignore completely. And perhaps that is what makes it unsettling. Not the idea of monsters or machines or hidden civilizations, but the realization that the ocean can still produce phenomena that sit just outside our understanding. Signals that we can record, measure, analyze, but not fully explain. Somewhere in the deep, where light never reaches and pressure reshapes everything familiar, something once spoke in sound. And even now, years later, we still do not know what was trying to be said. If you walk through the fog-covered coast of Maryland at night, there is a place where the silence feels different, heavier, older, almost watchful. At the edge of this coastline stands a structure that has witnessed centuries of storms, wars, and disappearances. The Point, Lookout Lighthouse. But what makes this place infamous is not just its age. It is what people claim still lingers inside it. Because according to countless visitors, this lighthouse is not empty, and it never truly has been. The first reports sound almost dismissible at first. Strange noises in the night, doors closing when no one is near them, shadows moving across upper floors with no source of light. But over time, the accounts begin to stack, and patterns begin to form. Visitors describe footsteps echoing through narrow corridors when the building is completely sealed. Heavy, deliberate steps, moving up and down the spiral staircases as if someone is still performing a routine from another century. Then come the voices. Whispers at first, barely audible. Then clearer fragments, muffled shouting. Occasional screams that seem to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And sometimes, complete silence that feels even worse than the sounds. Because silence in this place does not feel empty. It feels occupied. Point Lookout Lighthouse was built in the mid-1800s, a guiding structure for ships navigating the Chesapeake Bay. But its history is not just maritime. During the American Civil War, the surrounding area was transformed into a prisoner of war camp. Confederate soldiers were held in harsh conditions nearby, suffering disease, overcrowding, and despair. Many did not leave. That history became the foundation for something darker, because places that hold intense human suffering often carry something beyond memory, or so many believe. Modern researchers and paranormal investigators have spent years studying the lighthouse. They bring recording devices, thermal cameras, electromagnetic sensors. They attempt to document what witnesses describe. And sometimes they find anomalies. Temperature drops in isolated rooms. Sudden spikes in electromagnetic readings. Audio recordings capturing unexplained vocal fragments that do not match any known source. One of the most consistent reports involves apparitions. Figures seen in reflective glass or at the edge of vision. Sometimes male, sometimes female. Often dressed in clothing that does not match modern time periods. But there is one detail that repeats across dozens of testimonies. These figures do not behave like normal projections or illusions. They react. Visitors report seeing figures that turn toward them when spoken to, or vanish the moment they are directly observed. In some cases, Photographs taken in empty hallways later reveal blurred shapes that were not visible during the moment of capture. Skeptics argue this is confirmation bias, light tricks, dust, reflections. But skeptics rarely stay overnight, because the lighthouse changes when the sun goes down. The most unsettling reports come from those who remain inside after dark. People describe hearing objects move when nothing is present, locked doors rattling without cause, and in rare cases, the sound of breathing in completely empty rooms. One of the most repeated experiences involves the upper levels of the lighthouse. Visitors climbing the spiral staircase often report a sensation of being followed, not visually, not physically, but perceptually. A pressure in the air behind them that makes them turn instinctively, only to find nothing there. Yet when they reach the top, they often hesitate to descend, because something about the atmosphere feels different, heavier, more aware. Some claim to have heard distinct conversations near the lantern room. Others report knocking sounds that respond to their own movements, as if something is acknowledging their presence. No official explanation fully accounts for these experiences. Environmental factors such as wind, aging infrastructure, and acoustics can explain some of the phenomena. Old buildings often produce strange echoes. Temperature changes can create structural noises, but they do not explain synchronized footsteps, or responsive sounds, or repeated sightings of figures that appear in consistent forms across unrelated accounts. Over time, the lighthouse has become one of the most studied paranormal locations in the United States. Yet it remains unresolved. Because unlike many mysteries that fade under scientific review, this one persists in human testimony. And testimony is difficult to dismiss when it repeats across decades. Some historians suggest the lighthouse's reputation is the result of layered history, a place where war, suffering, isolation, and maritime tragedy all intersect. In that view, the hauntings are psychological echoes rather than supernatural events. But others argue that explanation is too convenient, too neat, because it does not account for physical evidence captured in recordings. It does not fully explain the temperature anomalies, and it does not address the consistent descriptions of figures that appear across unrelated witnesses who have never communicated with each other. The truth, if there is one, remains locked inside the structure, standing above the water, watching the coastline, and continuing to attract those who want answers, even when they are not sure what the question truly is. Point Lookout Lighthouse remains active as a historic site, but its reputation exists in another space entirely, not in official records, but in the stories people carry with them after they leave. Stories of footsteps that should not exist, voices that should not be heard, and presences that feel too aware to be ignored. And so the question lingers, long after every visitor returns home. If a place can remember everything that has ever happened within it, what happens when it refuses to forget? At 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, the North Atlantic Ocean was freezing calm. No storms, no warning signs, just a vast, silent darkness stretching beyond imagination. And somewhere in that darkness, a ship was sinking, the Titanic. But there is one detail buried deep in the story that most official histories barely mention. A survivor, not a passenger, not a crew member, but a dog. A Newfoundland named Rigel. And according to scattered accounts, what this dog did in those final hours may have changed the fate of multiple lives on that night. To understand this, you have to picture the chaos. The ship had struck an iceberg just hours earlier. The damage was catastrophic. Water was pouring into multiple compartments. Panic was spreading through the decks as lifeboats were lowered far too slowly, far too few. People were freezing, screaming, searching for order in a situation that had none. And above it all, the ocean waited. Cold, endless, indifferent. Rigel was the dog of a high-ranking officer aboard the Titanic, often described in maritime accounts as unusually intelligent and deeply loyal. Newfoundland dogs were known for their strength in water, but Rigel's behavior during the sinking has become part of maritime legend. As lifeboats were being lowered, survivors later recalled seeing the dog moving across the deck with unusual awareness. Not panicked like the humans around him. Focused. Alert. As if he understood something others did not. And then, when the final moments came, Rigel jumped into the freezing Atlantic. The water should have killed him almost instantly. The temperature alone was enough to cause shock within seconds. Most humans would lose function in minutes. But Rigel did not sink. Witnesses in nearby lifeboats reported seeing a dark shape moving through the water, swimming steadily, circling debris, staying close to survivors who had fallen into the sea. It did not behave like panic. It behaved like purpose. Hours passed. The Titanic disappeared beneath the surface. A structure once thought unsinkable was gone, reduced to silence and debris scattered across the ocean floor. But Rigel remained in the water. And this is where the story shifts from survival to something harder to explain. According to survivor testimonies, at least one lifeboat began drifting dangerously close to the massive submerged structure of the sinking ship. The current was pulling them toward what remained of the Titanic's hull, now partially submerged and unstable. Most of the people in the lifeboat were exhausted. Hypothermia was setting in. Their ability to react was fading. But Rigel, still swimming nearby, began barking. Loud, repeated, insistent. At first it seemed like noise, just animal reaction to chaos. But the barking did not stop. It intensified. And then something changed. A survivor in the lifeboat, later recorded in maritime accounts, noticed the dog's behavior was directed. Not random, not scattered. Rigel was looking toward a specific direction, barking toward something in the dark. Moments later, the crew of the rescue ship Carpathia, which had arrived in the area to retrieve survivors, noticed the lifeboat drifting into a dangerous position. It was too close to the Titanic's remaining structure. If the currents shifted, it could be crushed or pulled under. One crew member later claimed he only noticed the lifeboat because of the barking. That moment of awareness allowed them to redirect and rescue the survivors before disaster struck. Whether coincidence or not, Rigel's actions became part of Titanic folklore. After the rescue, the dog was taken aboard the Carpathia. According to accounts, he survived the journey and was later cared for in Scotland, living out the remainder of his life far from the ocean that nearly claimed him. But the story does not end there. Because Rigel's legend represents something larger than a single animal surviving disaster. It raises a question that has followed the Titanic disaster for over a century. How much awareness exists in moments of catastrophe that we fail to understand? Was Rigel simply reacting to noise and movement in chaotic conditions? Or was there something more instinctive, something beyond human interpretation, guiding behavior in ways we cannot fully explain? Scientists studying animal cognition often point out that many species possess heightened environmental awareness compared to humans. Dogs can detect changes in sound, vibration, and scent far beyond human perception. But awareness is not the same as prediction. And yet Rigel's actions seem to suggest a form of understanding that borders on anticipation. The timing of his movements, the direction of his warnings, the moments where his behavior aligned with danger before humans recognized it. All of it creates a pattern that is difficult to ignore completely. Still, maritime historians remain cautious. Many of these accounts were passed down through survivor recollections, oral histories, and fragmented records. In disasters of this scale, memory becomes unstable. Details shift over time. Stories merge. And yet, the image of the dog in the freezing Atlantic persists. a dark shape moving through icy water, circling lifeboats, barking into the night as one of the most famous ships in history slipped beneath the waves. There is something haunting about that image, not because it proves anything supernatural, but because it suggests awareness in a place defined by helplessness. The Titanic was a tragedy shaped by human error, engineering limits, and natural force. But within that chaos, stories like Rigel's remind us that survival sometimes depends on signals we barely understand, or notice too late. And so the question remains, long after the ship is gone and the ocean has reclaimed its silence. In moments where everything collapses at once, who is truly seeing the danger first? For a long moment, imagine this. Somewhere beneath the silence of our oceans, under miles of crushing pressure and absolute darkness, something massive is still there. Not moving, not dead, just waiting. And the strangest part is, we might have already seen it, and still have no idea what it is. Because the deeper scientists look into Earth's unexplored places, the more reality starts to feel unstable. Sonar returns shapes that do not match natural geology. Satellite scans reveal patterns too precise to be random. And recordings from the deepest parts of the ocean capture sounds that no known creature should be able to produce. This is not science fiction. These are real observations. And they all point to one unsettling idea. We do not fully understand the planet we live on. One of the most debated discoveries ever recorded beneath the ocean is a massive formation detected in the Baltic Sea. At first glance, it looks like a structure. Sharp angles, straight corridors, circular patterns aligned in ways that seem almost designed. Some researchers compared it to streets or foundations of an ancient city buried under sediment. Others dismissed it as a glitch in sonar imaging, a trick of overlapping data. But what makes it unsettling is not just the shape, it is the scale. This formation stretches for miles, far too large and too structured to be easily explained away. And when multiple scans showed similar anomalies in different parts of the ocean, the question became unavoidable. Are we seeing patterns that were always there, or something we were never meant to find? Far across the Atlantic, another mystery continues to disturb researchers who study abandoned coastal landmarks. The Point Lookout Lighthouse in Maryland stands as a relic of history, but also as a place filled with accounts that cannot be easily dismissed. Visitors have reported footsteps echoing through empty corridors, doors opening on their own, and voices where no one is present. Some believe it is simply imagination feeding on isolation. Others point to its past as a Civil War hospital and prison camp. But even that explanation does not fully account for the consistency of the reports. Different people, different years, same experiences, as if something about the location itself refuses to fade with time. Then there are stories that challenge not just history, but survival itself. During the sinking of the Titanic, accounts mention a Newfoundland dog named Rigel. According to surviving witnesses, the dog swam through freezing waters for hours, alerting nearby rescue crews to a drifting lifeboat that was in danger of being struck. Whether legend or truth, the story persists because it carries something deeply human inside it. The idea that intelligence and awareness might appear in places we least expect it, even in the instinct of an animal under impossible conditions. But not all mysteries stay on the surface. In 1997, scientists recorded a sound so powerful it traveled across vast distances of the Pacific Ocean. They called it the Bloop. The signal was strong enough to be picked up by multiple hydrophones, yet its origin remained unknown. At first, some believed it came from a massive marine creature larger than anything previously discovered. Others argued it was ice shifting deep in Antarctica. Years later, another similar sound appeared. Quieter, but still unexplained. Named Julia. Two separate events. Two similar signatures. One ocean that refuses to reveal what is hiding beneath it. And if the ocean is still full of unknowns, ancient history is no less confusing. Deep within Mexico, The Pyramid of the Sun rises as a reminder of civilizations we still do not fully understand. Its alignment, construction, and purpose continue to raise questions. Built with precision and enormous effort, it stands as more than just a structure. It feels like a message carved into stone, waiting to be interpreted. Some researchers suggest it was a ceremonial center. Others argue it was aligned with celestial bodies, possibly serving as a map of the stars. And then there are theories that go further, suggesting lost knowledge or forgotten influences that guided its creation. None of these explanations fully satisfy the evidence, because the deeper we study ancient architecture, the more consistent one pattern appears. Precision without explanation. Knowledge without clear origin. And that is where all these mysteries begin to connect. From underwater formations that resemble construction, to unexplained acoustic signals from the deep ocean, to ancient monuments aligned with impossible accuracy, a single question begins to emerge across all of them. What if these are not separate mysteries at all? What if they are fragments of something larger that we have not yet recognized? The truth is, every generation believes it understands its world better than the last. But history keeps proving otherwise. New discoveries continue to rewrite what we thought was settled. And in the gaps between what we know and what we cannot explain, these mysteries continue to exist, quietly resisting every attempt at closure. Because in the end, the most unsettling part is not what we have found. It is what might still be waiting to be found, hidden just beyond our current understanding, in places we have not yet learned how to see. If you think the ocean is the deepest mystery on Earth, there's something far more unsettling beneath it all. Not just what we have discovered, but what keeps appearing in places it should not exist. Patterns that repeat. Structures that defy explanation, and signals that feel like they were never meant for human ears. Because at a certain point, the question stops being, "What is this?" and becomes, "Why does it keep showing up in the same impossible ways?" One of the most disturbing themes across modern exploration is repetition. Scientists scan different regions of the planet, separated by thousands of miles, and still find similar anomalies. Circular formations on the ocean floor, symmetrical ridges buried under sediment, massive geometric shapes that do not match natural erosion patterns. At first, each discovery is treated as isolated, a coincidence, a misreading of sonar data. But when enough of these coincidences start aligning, the explanation begins to feel less certain. In the Pacific Ocean, deep mapping technology has revealed areas where the seafloor appears unusually structured. Not smooth, not chaotic, but ordered. Some of these formations resemble grids. Others look like long, straight corridors cutting through the seabed. The scale is so large that even advanced underwater drones struggle to map the full extent. Naturally, the scientific response is caution. Data errors are always considered first. Equipment distortion, compression artifacts. But even after recalibration and repeated scans, some of these patterns persist. And that is where discomfort begins, because nature rarely draws straight lines. It builds fractals, curves, randomness shaped by pressure, time, and erosion. But straight edges, right angles, and repeated spacing suggest something else entirely. Something deliberate. This leads us to one of the most controversial discussions in modern marine research. The possibility that we have not yet fully mapped the true structure of Earth's ocean floor. Not because we lack technology, but because certain areas remain unexplored in detail. There are regions so deep and remote that even satellite-based bathymetric models rely on estimation rather than direct measurement. In those gaps, anomalies can exist undetected for decades. And when they are finally discovered, there is no baseline to compare them against. But the ocean is not the only place where the unknown continues to surface. In different parts of the world, unexplained acoustic signals have been recorded coming from deep underground. Not earthquakes, not known geological activity, but short bursts of sound that do not match any recorded natural pattern. Some of these signals appear once and never return. Others repeat at intervals, as if following a cycle no one understands. Instruments detect them. Logs confirm them. Yet their origin remains unidentified. What makes this more unsettling is not the sound itself, but the consistency of its uncertainty. Every time researchers believe they are close to identifying a cause, the data shifts slightly. Not enough to invalidate the recording, but enough to prevent a clear conclusion, as if the phenomenon resists classification. And then there are the places where history itself becomes unstable. In archaeological sites across multiple continents, researchers have found structures that do not fit the timeline of known civilizations. Stonework that appears too precise for its estimated age. Alignments with celestial bodies that suggest knowledge of astronomy far beyond what was previously attributed to early societies. The Great Sphinx of Giza remains one of the most debated examples. Some studies suggest weathering patterns inconsistent with its accepted age. Others argue cultural records do not fully support the traditional timeline of its construction. But what makes the Sphinx especially intriguing is not just its age debate. It is the possibility that its original meaning may have been lost through layers of reinterpretation. Each civilization that encountered it gave it a name, a story, a role. But none can confirm what it was originally intended to represent. Over time, interpretation becomes history, and history becomes assumption. This pattern repeats itself across countless discoveries. Underwater anomalies become natural formations because no better explanation exists. Acoustic signals become ice movements or unknown marine noise because they cannot be verified. Ancient structures become ceremonial sites because purpose cannot be proven. But explanation is not the same as understanding, and that gap is where mystery survives. One of the most fascinating aspects of these unresolved phenomena is how often they resist final conclusions. Not because evidence is missing, but because evidence remains incomplete. Every discovery seems to open more questions than it answers. A sonar image reveals a shape. A deeper scan contradicts it. A follow-up expedition finds nothing conclusive. And the mystery returns to silence, waiting for the next attempt. This cycle has repeated itself across decades of exploration, which raises a difficult thought. Are we looking at fragmented truths scattered across time and geography? Or are we interpreting random noise as meaningful patterns because our minds are wired to find structure in chaos? There is no simple answer, but the persistence of these anomalies makes one thing clear. The world still holds regions of uncertainty that technology has not fully resolved. And perhaps that is the most important realization of all. Not that the mysteries are proof of something extraordinary, but that our understanding is still incomplete enough for them to exist in the first place. Because every generation believes it stands at the edge of full knowledge. Yet every generation is proven wrong in subtle, unexpected ways. And somewhere beneath the oceans, under ancient stone, and within the silence between scientific certainty and unknown data, these mysteries continue to exist. Not solved, not dismissed, just waiting. There are places on Earth where silence feels heavier than it should. Not empty silence, but a kind of pressure, as if something is being held back. Something that refuses to be spoken in clear terms. And the deeper you go into these mysteries, the more they start to feel connected. Not as separate stories, but as parts of a larger pattern we do not fully recognize yet. It begins again in the ocean. For decades, scientists have mapped the seafloor using sonar, satellites, and deep-sea probes. And yet, large portions of the ocean remain less detailed than the surface of the moon. In these gaps, unusual formations continue to appear. Not random shapes, but patterns that seem too structured to ignore. One of the most discussed examples is the recurring discovery of geometric formations beneath deep water regions. Long, straight lines, circular structures, repeating grid-like patterns that appear in multiple locations across the globe. Individually, each discovery is explained away. Data distortion, geological coincidence, natural sediment shifts. But when viewed collectively, a different picture starts to form. One where similar patterns appear in different oceans, separated by vast distances, yet sharing strangely consistent geometry. And that raises a question that researchers rarely say out loud. Why does nature repeat structure in ways that resemble design? Because on land, we recognize design easily. Cities, roads, buildings all carry intent. But underwater, where human history is largely absent, similar patterns become harder to explain. There are no confirmed ancient civilizations capable of constructing large-scale infrastructure on the deep ocean floor. And yet, the shapes remain. Not proven, not explained, just observed. And observation is where all real mysteries begin. Far above the ocean, in the frozen extremes of Antarctica and Greenland, another kind of anomaly exists. Ice cores reveal sudden climate shifts in Earth's past. Rapid warming, sudden cooling, extinctions that appear compressed into relatively short geological periods. Some researchers point to asteroid impacts. Others suggest volcanic activity or ocean current shifts. But in certain data sets, there are signs that multiple catastrophic events may have overlapped within the same time window. This has led to one of the most controversial ideas in modern speculative science, that Earth may have experienced a global reset event in the relatively recent past. Not in the sense of complete destruction, but in a way that reshaped ecosystems, climate, and possibly even the continuity of early human civilizations. Most mainstream scientists reject this interpretation, but the debate persists in fringe research circles, where archaeological gaps and sudden extinction patterns continue to fuel speculation. And that brings us back to ancient structures. Across the world, massive stone monuments still challenge conventional explanations of early engineering capabilities. The precision of certain constructions continues to surprise researchers, especially when considering the limited tools available at the time of their estimated creation. Alignments with astronomical events, consistent ratios in geometry, repetition of design principles across unrelated cultures that had no confirmed contact with each other. The Great Pyramid of Giza remains one of the most studied examples, not just for its scale, but for its mathematical consistency. Its orientation, proportions, and internal structure continued to generate debate among engineers and historians alike. But the Sphinx adds another layer of uncertainty. Weathering patterns on its body have led some geologists to suggest exposure to long periods of rainfall, potentially predating the established timeline of Egyptian dynastic history. This interpretation is heavily disputed, but it remains part of ongoing discussion in academic circles. Because once a structure challenges its own timeline, everything connected to it becomes uncertain. And uncertainty has a way of spreading. Even in modern times, unexplained phenomena continue to appear in scientific records. Deep ocean acoustic signals, sudden electromagnetic anomalies, unidentified atmospheric disturbances detected by satellites, each one individually explainable under certain assumptions. But collectively, they form a pattern of unresolved observations that resist full categorization. This is where the boundary between science and mystery becomes most visible. Science demands repeatability. Mystery thrives in inconsistency. And when a phenomenon appears once, then disappears, then reappears in a slightly altered form years later, it becomes difficult to fully classify. One such example is the phenomenon known as unusual deep ocean sounds. Detected across different time periods, these signals often share characteristics but differ in intensity and frequency. Some resemble natural movements of ice, Others suggest biological sources. A few remain entirely unexplained. Even when a theory fits one recording, it often fails to explain the next. And so the mystery continues. Not because there is no answer, but because the answer never fully holds. This pattern of partial explanation appears again and again across different fields: archaeology, oceanography, astronomy, geology. Each discipline uncovers fragments that challenge existing frameworks but rarely completes the picture, which leads to an uncomfortable possibility: that the world is not hiding a single secret, but many overlapping unknowns that we are only beginning to connect. And connection changes everything. Because once unrelated anomalies start forming a pattern, the question is no longer about individual explanations. It becomes about structure, about whether these mysteries are isolated errors in understanding or indicators of something larger beneath the surface of what we call reality. No evidence confirms this idea, but no evidence fully eliminates it either. And that is where human curiosity becomes unstoppable. We keep scanning. We keep measuring. We keep returning to the same unanswered signals, the same unexplained formations, the same ancient structures that refuse to fit neatly into established history. Not because we expect immediate answers, but because something about the unknown refuses to stay silent. And as long as it remains silent, we will keep listening. What if the biggest mystery on Earth is not something we have lost, but something we are constantly walking past without realizing it? Not hidden in a single place, not locked in a forgotten tomb or buried under ice, but scattered, fragmented, repeating across oceans, deserts, ancient ruins, and even modern scientific data, like pieces of a puzzle that were never meant to be solved in isolation. Because the deeper you go into these unexplained phenomena, the more they stop behaving like separate mysteries. They start behaving like echoes of the same unanswered question. And that question keeps showing up in different forms. In the deep ocean, sonar scans reveal shapes that do not belong in natural geology. Long, straight edges, perfect curves, repeating grid-like patterns stretching across massive distances. Some regions appear almost structured, as if organized by an intelligence we do not recognize. At first, each discovery is treated as an error, a glitch, a misinterpretation of data. But over time, similar patterns appear in different parts of the world. And that is where explanation becomes more complicated, because coincidence has limits. Patterns do not repeat forever without meaning or cause, and yet they do. In ancient archaeology, similar uncertainty emerges. Massive stone structures built with precision that still challenges modern engineering assumptions. Alignments with celestial bodies that suggest knowledge of astronomy far beyond what was expected for their time. And construction techniques that appear consistent across civilizations that had no confirmed contact. The Great Pyramid of Giza continues to raise questions not just about how it was built, but why its mathematical precision seems so deliberate. Its alignment with cardinal directions is nearly perfect. Its internal structure reveals layers of design that do not appear accidental. Nearby, the Sphinx adds another layer of uncertainty. Erosion patterns on its surface have led some researchers to suggest exposure to environmental conditions older than traditionally accepted timelines. These interpretations remain debated, but they continue to challenge established historical frameworks. And when history becomes uncertain, everything built on it becomes unstable. Even language begins to shift under that uncertainty. Across mythologies from completely different regions of the world, similar themes appear. Stories of sky beings, knowledge bringers, and civilizations receiving guidance from entities beyond Earth. These narratives are often dismissed as symbolic or religious interpretation. But the repetition is what makes them difficult to ignore. Different cultures, different continents, similar core ideas, and repetition is rarely meaningless. In the modern scientific world, the mystery continues in a different form. Deep ocean recordings capture unexplained acoustic signals that do not match known marine life or geological activity. Some are brief pulses, others are long, sustained frequencies that travel across vast distances. The most famous of these signals were given names: the Bloop, Julia, each recorded by different instruments at different times, yet sharing unusual characteristics that resist simple classification. Some explanations point to ice movement. Others suggest underwater seismic activity. But not all data fits neatly into these models, and so the signals remain partially explained, but not fully understood. Above the oceans, satellite imagery occasionally detects unusual surface anomalies. Circular disturbances, large geometric formations beneath shallow waters, and regions where mapping data appears inconsistent across repeated scans. Each time, further investigation narrows the possibilities, but rarely eliminates uncertainty completely. And this is where a pattern begins to form across disciplines. Every time we approach a mystery, we reduce it, but we never fully remove it. We replace unknowns with probabilities. We narrow possibilities. But the final answer often remains just out of reach. And that distance between likely explanation and confirmed truth is where curiosity lives. Some researchers argue this is simply the nature of complex systems. Earth is large, chaotic, and still partially unexplored. Unknowns are expected. But others suggest something more unsettling: that certain anomalies do not behave like random gaps in knowledge. They behave like structured absences, like missing information that fits too neatly into the spaces between what we already understand. This idea remains controversial, but it continues to appear in discussions whenever multiple unexplained phenomena are compared side by side. Because when you line them up, something strange happens. Ocean grid-like formations, ancient megastructures, unexplained acoustic signals, sudden archaeological inconsistencies, rapid climate shifts in Earth's past that seem compressed into narrow time periods. Individually, each has an explanation attempt. Collectively, they form something harder to dismiss. Not proof of a single cause, but evidence of a shared unknown pattern we have not yet identified. And that is where the discomfort begins. Because human understanding relies on separation. We categorize. We isolate. We define boundaries between disciplines so that each mystery can be handled independently. But nature does not always respect those boundaries, and neither does reality. There is another layer to this that often goes unnoticed: the gaps in exploration itself. We have mapped parts of the ocean in extraordinary detail, yet vast regions remain low resolution or unexplored. We have studied ancient sites extensively, yet many areas remain unexcavated. We have recorded atmospheric and seismic data globally, yet interpretation is still limited by existing models. In other words, we are building understanding inside incomplete coverage. And incomplete coverage always leaves room for unresolved patterns. So the question is not whether mysteries exist. That much is obvious. The question is whether they are independent anomalies or reflections of a larger structure we are only beginning to detect. No confirmed evidence answers that, but no evidence fully rejects it either. And that balance between explanation and uncertainty is where exploration continues. Because every generation believes it is close to final understanding. Yet every generation inherits new mysteries that force older assumptions to be revised. And so the cycle continues. We discover, we explain, we revise, and we discover again. Always moving forward, but never fully reaching the edge of complete understanding. And somewhere in that ongoing search, beneath oceans, behind ancient stone, and within unexplained signals that still echo through modern instruments, the same silence remains. Not empty, not resolved, just waiting. There are moments in science when the data doesn't just fail to explain something. It actively refuses to settle. A reading that should be stable shifts without cause. A signal that should fade repeats in a pattern too precise to ignore. A structure that should erode into randomness holds its geometry as if time itself is avoiding it. And the strange part is, these moments are not rare anymore. They are scattered across disciplines, across continents, across oceans, as if reality itself is leaving behind inconsistent footprints. One of the most unsettling examples comes again from the deep ocean. Despite decades of mapping, large portions of the seafloor remain poorly understood. And in those regions, sonar occasionally returns formations that defy expected geology. Not just unusual shapes, but arrangements that appear ordered. Linear boundaries, repeated spacing, intersecting angles that resemble structured layouts rather than natural erosion. At first, each instance is treated as isolated noise, a technical artifact, a flaw in interpretation. But repeated scans sometimes confirm the same outlines. And that is where certainty begins to weaken. Because geology has rules: pressure, erosion, sediment deposition, tectonic movement. Over time, these forces create patterns that are complex, but not deliberately structured. Nature is powerful, but it is rarely geometric in the way human design is geometric. Yet here, geometry keeps appearing. Not once, not in one location, but in multiple distant regions where no known civilization has ever existed, and where conditions make large-scale construction extremely unlikely. So the question shifts. Not, what is this structure? But why does this kind of structure appear at all in places where it shouldn't? Above the ocean floor, another mystery continues to circulate through scientific archives. Unidentified acoustic events recorded over decades, often dismissed individually, but increasingly difficult to ignore when compared side by side. Short bursts of sound, low-frequency waves, long-duration signals that seem to travel vast distances without clear attenuation patterns. Some are linked to ice movement, others to underwater seismic shifts. Some remain unclassified entirely. What makes them disturbing is not just their existence, but their repetition across time. Similar patterns, different years, different instruments, same unresolved classification. It is as if the ocean occasionally speaks in a language that briefly aligns with our instruments, only to fall silent before interpretation becomes possible. And when we turn to land, the uncertainty does not disappear. Ancient sites across the world continue to challenge assumptions about early human capability. Not because they are impossible to build, but because their precision raises questions about knowledge transfer, tools, and planning that are difficult to reconstruct from surviving evidence alone. Massive stone blocks fitted with minimal spacing. Structures aligned with astronomical bodies with surprising accuracy. Repeated architectural themes across cultures that had no confirmed communication routes. The Great Pyramid of Giza remains central to this discussion. Its construction reflects a level of planning that still forces modern engineers to acknowledge how little margin for error existed in its design. Every layer appears intentional, every alignment deliberate. Nearby, the Sphinx continues to generate debate, not just about age, but about origin conditions. Some geological interpretations suggest weathering patterns that do not fully align with the conventional timeline of its construction. Others reject this view entirely, arguing for alternative explanations within known climatic history. But what makes these debates persistent is not certainty on either side. It is the fact that neither side can fully close the case. And that is where mystery survives longest. Not in the unknown, but in the unresolved disagreement between competing explanations. Even mythology adds another layer to this pattern. Across separate civilizations, stories of sky descent, divine instruction, and knowledge transfer appear in different forms. Some describe beings descending from the heavens. Others speak of gifts of architecture, agriculture, or astronomy delivered from outside human origin. Most modern interpretations classify these as symbolic narratives. But the consistency of structure across unrelated cultures remains a point of curiosity for some researchers. Not as proof of anything specific, but as a pattern worth noticing rather than dismissing outright. Because when similar ideas appear independently across time and geography, the human instinct is to ask whether they share a deeper root, or whether they are simply reflections of universal imagination. Science does not easily answer that question. It can measure artifacts. It can date materials. It can reconstruct timelines. But it struggles to quantify shared narrative emergence across isolated civilizations. And so, the question remains open. Meanwhile, modern anomalies continue to surface. Satellite data occasionally reveals transient features in atmospheric and oceanic regions that do not persist long enough for detailed analysis. Magnetic irregularities appear and disappear. Deep radar scans occasionally detect density variations that are not replicated in follow-up passes. Each event alone is insignificant. Together, they form a pattern of inconsistency in observation itself. And that is where things become more complex. Because we assume instruments give us a stable reflection of reality. But if readings vary without predictable cause, then the question is not only what is being observed, but how consistently we are able to observe it. Even measurement becomes part of the mystery. At this point, the line between discovery and interpretation begins to blur. We are no longer just uncovering unknowns. We are trying to determine whether unknowns are stable objects, temporary phenomena, or artifacts of incomplete perception. And each possibility changes everything. If they are stable, then they represent hidden features of Earth we have yet to understand. If they are temporary, then we are witnessing processes we cannot yet categorize. If they are perceptual artifacts, then the limitation is not in the world, but in us. None of these answers are comforting in a simple way, because each one suggests that certainty is more fragile than we assume. And yet exploration continues. Not because we expect final resolution soon, but because the alternative is to accept that large portions of our world remain partially defined. And that idea, more than any single mystery, is what keeps attention locked on these discoveries. Because the deeper pattern emerging across all of them is not a single hidden truth. It is the persistence of the unknown itself, repeating, returning, resurfacing in different forms, as if reality is not withholding answers, but gradually revealing that the boundaries of understanding are still under construction. What if the real mystery is not what we cannot find, but what we are repeatedly told is nothing? Because across science, archaeology, and ocean exploration, there are places where data doesn't just fail. It gets flattened, reduced, dismissed, as if something too complex has been quietly pushed into the category of inconclusive and left there to fade. And once you start noticing that pattern, it becomes hard to ignore. In the deepest parts of the ocean, mapping technology continues to reveal anomalies that don't behave like random terrain. Some regions show repeating geometric formations. Others show long, uninterrupted linear structures beneath sediment layers that should normally erase any sharp definition over time. At first glance, these are explained as errors, compression artifacts, noise in sonar readings, misaligned stitching between scans. But what makes them difficult to fully dismiss is repetition. Because the same kinds of patterns appear again and again in different regions, recorded by different teams using different equipment. Not identical shapes, but identical types of structure. Straight edges where randomness is expected. Right angles where erosion should dominate. Circular outlines where no known process should create them at that scale. Individually, each case is weak evidence. Together, they begin to form something harder to ignore. And this is where oceanography meets its most uncomfortable limitation. We have mapped more of Mars in higher resolution than we have mapped Earth's deep sea floor. Entire regions remain undersampled, reconstructed through interpolation rather than direct observation, which means there are still large gaps where reality is inferred, not confirmed. And in those gaps, anomalies don't need to be fully proven to exist. They only need to avoid being disproven. That is enough for uncertainty to survive. But the ocean is only one layer of this pattern. On land, ancient structures continue to create the same tension between explanation and unresolved detail. Massive stone constructions that appear precisely aligned with astronomical events. Architectural designs that repeat across civilizations separated by geography and time. Engineering choices that suggest intentional planning at scales that still challenge modern replication. The Great Pyramid remains one of the clearest examples. Not because it is unexplained, but because it is too well measured to be easily dismissed. Its geometry is consistent. Its orientation is precise. Its construction required coordination that still raises logistical questions even with modern simulation tools. And yet even here, certainty splits into interpretations rather than conclusions. Some view it as evidence of advanced ancient engineering capacity. Others see it as an extraordinary but explainable achievement of human organization and time. Both interpretations can account for parts of the evidence. Neither fully closes every question. And that incomplete closure is what keeps the mystery alive. Nearby, the Sphinx introduces another layer of uncertainty. Geological discussions around its erosion patterns have led to competing timelines, each supported by different interpretations of environmental data. Some argue for conventional dating. Others suggest exposure to weather conditions that would imply a much older origin. What makes this debate persistent is not that one side is missing evidence. It is that both sides rely on interpretations of the same physical object, yet reach different historical conclusions. The object does not change. Only the framework around it does. And that is a key feature of many unresolved mysteries. The data remains stable. The explanation shifts. In modern science, similar patterns appear in a different form. Unexplained acoustic signals recorded in the deep ocean continue to generate discussion. Some are linked to known natural phenomena. Others remain partially classified or only loosely categorized. A few resist consistent explanation across multiple data sets. What is notable is not a single signal, but the recurrence of signals that share structural similarities without sharing confirmed origins. Different times, different locations, similar patterns. And each time, the explanation is provisional. Because science requires classification. But classification requires completeness. And in incomplete environments, categories remain flexible. This creates a subtle but important tension. We are constantly trying to force unknown phenomena into known frameworks, even when those frameworks may not fully apply. And most of the time that works. Until it doesn't. Because every now and then, something appears that resists compression into existing categories entirely. Not because it is supernatural or impossible, but because it doesn't fit the assumptions we use to define normality. And once that happens, the explanation process slows down. Not due to lack of effort, but due to lack of structural alignment between observation and model. In simpler terms, we may not be missing data. We may be missing the correct way to organize it. And that possibility changes how we interpret everything. Because when structure is unclear, even accurate information can lead to incomplete conclusions. Across multiple fields, researchers have begun noticing a subtle pattern in unresolved cases. The presence of partial explanations that account for most, but not all, observed data. Enough to be plausible, not enough to be final. This creates a kind of scientific limbo, a space where mysteries are not fully open but not fully closed either. And in that space, speculation tends to grow. Ancient history becomes linked with unexplained modern phenomena. Geological anomalies become connected to speculative theories. Disconnected observations begin to form narrative patterns that feel coherent, even when not proven. This is not necessarily incorrect thinking. It is human pattern recognition trying to complete incomplete data sets. But it also introduces risk, because coherence is not the same as correctness. A story can feel unified without being accurate. And that is why careful separation between evidence and interpretation becomes essential. Still, the persistence of these anomalies continues to raise the same underlying question. Why do certain types of unknowns appear across completely different systems? Why do ocean anomalies resemble structured design in some cases? Why do ancient structures reflect precision that challenges expected timelines? Why do acoustic and atmospheric signals repeat patterns that are not easily classified? No single answer exists yet. And perhaps that is the most important part. Because the real mystery may not be any individual discovery. It may be the consistency with which incomplete understanding appears across unrelated domains, not as a single hidden truth, but as a recurring limit in perception, measurement, or interpretation. And until that limit is fully understood, every new discovery will continue to do the same thing. It will explain something small, and then open something much larger in its place. There are discoveries that don't just add information to science. They quietly change the way we think science works, not because they prove something extraordinary, but because they refuse to stay neatly explained. They sit in the middle of certainty and doubt, resisting both closure and dismissal. And over time, those kinds of discoveries start to form a pattern of their own. In the deep ocean, mapping systems continue to reveal terrain that challenges expectations. Vast regions show irregular but strangely organized formations. Some look like ridges arranged in repeating intervals. Others appear as long, linear trenches that do not match known tectonic behavior. In certain areas, sonar scans even suggest grid-like structures beneath layers of sediment. Not sharp enough to confirm construction, not random enough to dismiss entirely. And that is where interpretation becomes unstable, because natural processes do not typically produce clean geometry at scale. Erosion bends, pressure distorts, time blurs edges. But these formations sometimes preserve order in ways that feel intentional, even if intention cannot be proven. So researchers are left in a difficult position. They can describe what is seen, but they cannot fully define what it is. And that gap between description and definition is where mystery survives. On land, a similar pattern appears in archaeology. Ancient sites across different continents show architectural precision that raises recurring questions about planning and knowledge transfer. Massive stone blocks fitted with minimal spacing. Structures aligned with celestial movements with surprising consistency. Repeated use of similar design logic across cultures that were not traditionally connected. The more these sites are studied, the more they appear less like isolated achievements and more like variations of a broader architectural instinct that we do not fully understand. The Great Pyramid of Giza remains central to this discussion. Its construction is not mysterious because it exists, but because its precision invites questions about methods that are still being modeled today. Its orientation to cardinal directions is remarkably accurate. Its internal structure shows deliberate planning beyond basic monument building. And yet, even with advanced tools and simulations, reconstructing its exact construction process remains incomplete. Nearby, the Sphinx continues to generate debate through geological interpretation. Weathering patterns on its surface have been analyzed from multiple perspectives, each offering different conclusions about environmental exposure over time. Some interpretations suggest longer periods of erosion than traditionally assumed. Others argue for alternative environmental conditions that still fit within accepted timelines. But no interpretation has fully eliminated disagreement. And when interpretation splits, certainty becomes relative rather than absolute. In modern science, this pattern repeats in a different form through unexplained natural signals. Deep ocean acoustic recordings occasionally capture sounds that do not align perfectly with known sources. Some match ice movement. Some align loosely with seismic activity. Others remain only partially categorized due to insufficient reference data. What makes these recordings notable is not a single event, but the recurrence of similar signal structures across different years and locations. Patterns repeat, but origins vary or remain unclear. And that creates a scientific tension that cannot be resolved through repetition alone. Because repetition confirms consistency, not cause. And cause is what science ultimately seeks. This is why many of these mysteries remain open despite decades of study. Not because they are ignored, but because they resist final categorization within current models. And when models cannot fully contain observations, the system enters a state of controlled uncertainty, a state where explanation exists, but completion does not. And that is where speculation begins to grow. Across online discussions, independent research groups, and fringe academic circles, these unresolved phenomena are often connected into broader narratives. Ocean structures, ancient architecture, acoustic anomalies, climate shifts, unexplained geological formations. Individually, each category has its own field of study. But when viewed together, they begin to suggest a recurring theme. Not a single conclusion, but a shared characteristic of incompleteness. And incompleteness is not rare in science. It is expected. What makes this case interesting is not the presence of unknowns, but their persistence across unrelated systems. Different environments, different time periods, different measurement methods. Yet similar types of unresolved structures and signals continue to appear. This raises a subtle but important question. Are we dealing with separate mysteries that happen to resemble each other? Or are we observing different expressions of the same limitation in understanding? Science does not currently answer this in a unified way, because each field focuses on its own boundaries. Oceanography studies ocean data. Archaeology studies historical structures. Geophysics studies Earth's internal processes. Integration across all of them is difficult, not because the data is unavailable, but because the frameworks are designed to operate independently. And when frameworks remain separate, patterns that cross boundaries become harder to recognize as connected. So they remain scattered. Unlinked. Individually explained, but collectively unresolved. This is why many researchers emphasize caution when interpreting cross-domain patterns. The human brain is highly skilled at finding connections, even where none exist. It is a survival advantage that sometimes creates false coherence. But it is also true that some real patterns only become visible when multiple datasets are compared. So the challenge is not choosing between skepticism and curiosity. It is maintaining both without collapsing into certainty too early. Because premature certainty is where many mysteries end prematurely, not because they are solved, but because they are categorized. And categorization, while useful, can sometimes hide complexity under labels that feel complete, but are not. Across oceans, across ancient sites, and across modern scientific recordings, the same tension continues. Data appears. Explanations follow. Debate continues. And then uncertainty remains. Not as failure, but as unfinished understanding. And as long as that remains true, these mysteries will continue to resurface in different forms, asking the same quiet question again and again. Not, what is this? But, how much of it are we actually seeing? What you're about to hear is not a theory. It is not a story built for entertainment alone. It is a collection of fragments that refuse to fit together, even after decades of investigation. And somewhere inside these fragments, something is still hidden, watching, waiting to be understood. Because the deeper we go into the unknown, the more reality starts to feel unstable. Patterns appear where there should be none. Signals echo from places no human should be able to reach. And structures, far beneath the surface of our world, suggest that history may not be as complete as we believe. Under the surface of the Baltic Sea, sonar scans once revealed something that should not exist. A massive formation, stretching across the ocean floor, shaped with sharp angles and straight lines that defy natural erosion. It does not behave like rock. It does not resemble sediment. Instead, it looks deliberate, constructed, almost as if something once organized it into purpose before being buried by time and water. Experts attempted to dismiss it as a mapping error, a glitch, overlapping data layers from imperfect scanning systems. But repeated passes produced the same result, the same geometry, the same impossible symmetry. And even more disturbing, similar formations have been reported in other regions of the world's oceans. Hidden grids, linear structures, right angles forming vast shapes across the deep. If these patterns are natural, they are unlike anything we have ever classified. If they are artificial, then the implications are far beyond anything current history can explain. And yet, this is only one piece. In another part of the world, ancient stone structures rise from the earth with mathematical precision that still challenges modern engineering. The Great Sphinx of Egypt, weathered by time and wind, has sparked debates that reach beyond archaeology. Some researchers argue its erosion patterns suggest exposure to water far older than the accepted timeline of desert formation. Others point to inconsistencies in historical records, suggesting that entire chapters of construction history may have been rewritten or lost. But there is something more unsettling than the debate itself. Across ancient civilizations, the same patterns appear again and again. Pyramids aligned with celestial formations. Massive stones cut and placed with a precision that would require tools we did not believe existed at the time. And buried beneath myth and legend, repeated references to beings, forces, or intelligences that descended from the sky, interacted with humanity, and then vanished without explanation. Coincidence is one possibility, but repetition across time and geography begins to suggest something else entirely. Even in modern history, unanswered mysteries continue to surface from the depths. In 1997, an underwater recording captured a sound so powerful it was detected thousands of kilometers apart. It was named the Bloop. The source was never confirmed with certainty. Ice movement was suggested. Geological activity was proposed. But none of these explanations fully matched the characteristics of the signal. Years later, another similar sound was detected, labeled Julia, renewing questions that had never truly been answered. Something vast may be moving in places we cannot see, or something long forgotten may still exist beneath the pressure of the deep ocean. And then there are the accounts that blur the line between history and myth. Stories of creatures described in ancient coastal cultures. Beings that resemble human form but are not fully human. Entities said to dwell in the deepest parts of the ocean, emerging only under rare and unexplained conditions. Modern science has no confirmed evidence of such life forms, yet reports continue to surface in fragmented testimonies, often dismissed, sometimes unexplained, always unresolved. Even with advanced exploration technology, most of the ocean remains uncharted. We have mapped more of the surface of Mars than we have of our own planet's deepest waters. Which raises a difficult question. What else is still hidden beneath us? Some researchers argue that what we are discovering now are not new mysteries, but echoes of an older world. A world that may have existed before recorded history. A world that was disrupted by cataclysmic events so large that only fragments remain in geological layers and cultural memory. Mass extinction events, sudden climate shifts, impact craters hidden beneath ice sheets, all pointing to moments in time where the surface of the Earth may have been reset more than once. And if that is true, then what we call ancient history may only be the beginning of the story, not the whole of it. Because every mystery uncovered leads to another layer beneath it. Every explanation creates more questions than answers. And every discovery reminds us of how little we truly understand. Somewhere in the silence of the deep ocean, in the alignment of ancient stone, and in the echoes of unexplained signals, there is a pattern forming. Not random, not accidental, but unfinished. And as we move forward, the question is no longer whether these mysteries exist. The question is what they are trying to tell us. Something is wrong with the way we understand time. Not in the way textbooks describe it. Not in the clean, linear progression from past to present to future. But in the way reality behaves when no one is watching closely enough to explain it. Because across the world, scattered through history and buried beneath layers of certainty, there are moments that simply do not align. Events that appear fully formed without origin. Structures that seem too advanced for their time. And signals that feel as if they were never meant for human ears at all. In remote regions of Antarctica, satellite imagery has revealed formations beneath the ice that some researchers struggle to explain. Not random shapes, not natural erosion patterns, but geometric structures with symmetry that appears deliberate. Lines that converge with precision. Angles that suggest design rather than chance. Official explanations often lean toward optical illusion or data distortion. Ice shifting. Sensor interference. Mapping errors stacked on top of each other. But the problem is consistency. The same patterns appear repeatedly across different scans, different years, different conditions. Always in the same place. Always forming the same impossible geometry. And if it is not an error, then it becomes something else entirely. Something built. Something hidden. Something that should not be there. But Antarctica is only one piece of a much larger question. In deserts across the world, strange circular formations have been found beneath layers of sand. Some are vast enough to be seen from space. Others are only revealed through ground-penetrating radar. They appear structured, almost engineered, yet there is no known civilization linked to their creation. No historical record that explains their purpose. No clear timeline that places them within known human development. And still, they exist. Silent, buried, waiting. Then there are the deep ocean trenches, where pressure is so extreme that even our most advanced machines struggle to survive. In these places, hydrophones have captured unexplained patterns of sound. Low-frequency pulses that repeat at irregular intervals. Some resemble natural geological activity. Others behave in ways that suggest coordination. Not random noise, but rhythm. As if something far below the surface is communicating in a language we cannot decode. One of the most unsettling aspects of these discoveries is not what we find, but what we fail to find. No clear source. No definitive origin. Just signals that begin and end without explanation, leaving only silence behind them. And silence, in science, is never truly empty. It is often just unanswered. Even history itself is not immune to these distortions. Ancient civilizations across continents share architectural patterns that should not align. Pyramidal structures appearing in different parts of the world with similar mathematical ratios. Megalithic constructions using stones so large and precisely placed that modern engineering still struggles to replicate them without advanced machinery. The question is no longer whether these civilizations were capable. The question is whether we fully understand what capability meant at the time. Because there are gaps in the timeline. Periods where evidence seems incomplete. Where technological regression appears sudden. Where knowledge seems to disappear and then re-emerge centuries later, as if it was never fully lost, only temporarily absent. Some researchers suggest catastrophic events. Others propose environmental collapse. But a small group of theories explores a more unsettling possibility: that human history is not a continuous rise, but a series of resets. And each time, fragments of knowledge survive, carried forward in myth, in architecture, in unexplained artifacts that resist classification. Even modern anomalies continue to deepen the mystery. Unidentified aerial phenomena observed entering and exiting ocean surfaces without impact. Objects detected moving at speeds that defy known physics. And recordings of electromagnetic activity that do not match any known natural or artificial source. Each case individually can be debated. Misidentification, equipment error, atmospheric distortion. But together they begin to form a pattern that is harder to dismiss. Because patterns imply structure, and structure implies intent. At the center of all these mysteries lies a disturbing possibility: that what we call unexplained is not random at all. That these events are not isolated incidents, but connected points in a larger framework we have not yet recognized. A framework that may extend beyond human history, beyond human perception, beyond even the limits of what we currently define as reality. And if that is true, then we are not just discovering mysteries. We are observing fragments of something much larger, trying to reveal itself in pieces too small for us to fully comprehend. The question is no longer whether these anomalies exist. They do. The real question is why they are still here, and what happens when we finally understand the pattern they are forming. Before anything else, there's something important to understand about mysteries like these. They don't stay isolated for long. One discovery leads to another. One anomaly starts to mirror something thousands of miles away. And slowly, what looked like random noise begins to resemble a pattern that no one is fully ready to explain. Because once you start connecting the dots, you stop seeing individual mysteries. You start seeing a system. And systems always have structure. In the depths of the Atlantic Ocean, researchers once recorded something unusual during deep-sea sonar mapping. Not a single object, but a series of repeating formations aligned in ways that did not match natural geology. Long, straight segments, sudden right-angle turns, symmetry that seemed too deliberate to be accidental. At first, it was dismissed as interference, data corruption, a glitch caused by overlapping scan layers. But the same patterns reappeared. Not once, not twice, but across multiple independent surveys. And each time the explanation became less convincing. Because nature rarely draws straight lines across vast distances without reason. And it almost never repeats those lines with precision. Meanwhile, on land, ancient structures continue to challenge modern understanding of early engineering. Massive stone blocks cut with angles so precise that even today's tools would struggle to replicate them without advanced machinery. Yet these structures were built in eras where such technology should not have existed. Some researchers argue that we are underestimating ancient capability. Others suggest lost knowledge. But there is another possibility that is rarely spoken aloud because it is difficult to prove and even harder to accept. That some of these structures were not built with gradual development in mind, but introduced, as if knowledge itself appeared fully formed, then slowly faded over time. Even natural landscapes seem to echo this idea. In remote regions of Siberia, satellite imaging has revealed circular depressions in the ground arranged in clusters that do not match typical geological formations. Some are perfectly round. Others overlap in ways that suggest intentional placement. No clear excavation history explains them. No known civilization is linked to their creation. And yet they remain, undisturbed, unexplained, unclassified. Then there are the signals. Deep within space, radio telescopes occasionally detect bursts of energy that last only milliseconds. They are powerful, precise, and extremely distant. Some repeat at irregular intervals. Others appear only once and never return. Scientists classify many of these as fast radio bursts, likely caused by extreme cosmic events. But a small number remain unusual. Their patterns suggest repetition, structure, even directionality, not random emission, but something closer to communication. The idea is controversial, not because it is impossible, but because it challenges the assumption that intelligence must resemble us in order to be recognized. And that assumption may be limiting more than we realize. Even within our own planet, unexplained phenomena continue to emerge from places we rarely fully explore. In deep caves, researchers have found mineral formations that appear to grow in geometric sequences that are not typical of natural crystallization patterns. In some cases, the formations appear layered in ways that suggest repeated environmental conditions far more precise than normal geological processes would produce. It raises a difficult question. If nature is capable of this level of order without intention, then what else might we be overlooking? And if intention is involved, then where is it coming from? Across all of these mysteries, one thing remains consistent: a lack of origin point. No clear beginning, no traceable source, just outcomes that appear fully formed as if they were placed into the world already complete. This is where speculation begins to split into different directions. Some believe these are remnants of lost civilizations, erased by time or catastrophe. Others suggest natural phenomena we simply do not yet understand. And a smaller group of theories explores something far more unsettling: that intelligence may not always follow linear development, that it might appear, disappear, and reappear across time in ways we cannot yet track. Because if patterns exist beneath the surface of the ocean, beneath the ice, within ancient stone, and even across cosmic signals, then the question is no longer whether they are real. The question becomes whether they are connected. And if they are connected, then they are not separate mysteries at all. They are pieces of something larger, something that has been here longer than we have been able to notice it, something that does not announce itself clearly, but reveals itself slowly, in fragments, across time, and we are only just beginning to see the outline. There are places on Earth where silence feels different. Not peaceful silence, not empty silence, but the kind that feels like something is holding its breath just beneath the surface, waiting for you to notice it. And in those places, even the most advanced tools struggle to give clear answers, because not everything that exists is willing to be measured. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, vast stretches of unexplored terrain remain untouched by human eyes. Sonar mapping has revealed structures that do not match surrounding geology, long formations that appear unusually straight, intersections that resemble constructed layouts rather than natural sediment shifts. Some scientists describe them as coincidental alignments in underwater rock formations. Others suggest tectonic activity shaped by time and pressure. But explanations lose strength when the same patterns appear in multiple distant locations, because coincidence does not usually repeat itself with precision. And when repetition enters the equation, curiosity turns into something heavier: suspicion. On land, similar questions emerge from ancient sites that continue to resist full understanding. Massive stone constructions aligned with astronomical events. Structures placed with mathematical precision that still challenges modern replication. And in many cases, no clear historical record explaining how or why they were built. In some regions, local legends describe knowledge that arrived suddenly, as if delivered rather than developed. Skills in architecture, astronomy, and engineering appearing fully formed within early societies. To modern science, this raises uncomfortable questions. Did knowledge evolve gradually everywhere? Or were there moments when it appeared in concentrated bursts, without visible progression? Even more unsettling is what happens when different ancient civilizations are compared side by side. Separated by oceans, continents, and thousands of years, they still built similar pyramid-like structures. They oriented them toward celestial bodies with surprising consistency, and they embedded symbolic systems that, while culturally distinct, often share underlying patterns. It is not proof of connection, but it is enough to question isolation. Meanwhile, in modern times, unexplained phenomena continue to surface in ways that feel strangely familiar. In controlled scientific environments, unexpected anomalies occasionally appear in datasets. Readings that cannot be replicated under identical conditions. Signals that appear once and never return. Or environmental fluctuations that do not match known physical behavior. Most are dismissed after review, but not all are fully explained. And what remains unexplained tends to accumulate quietly, forming a background of uncertainty that rarely reaches public attention. Because certainty is comfortable, and uncertainty is not. Even in the atmosphere above us, strange patterns occasionally emerge. High-altitude sensors have recorded brief electromagnetic disturbances that do not correspond to known weather systems, solar activity, or human-generated interference. They last only seconds, sometimes less, and then they vanish without trace. No source identified, no cause confirmed, just a brief disruption in a system we assume we understand. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of all these anomalies is not their existence. It is their behavior. They do not escalate. They do not evolve into something obvious. They remain fragmented, incomplete, as if designed to be seen only partially, never fully understood in one moment. This creates a strange effect on human perception. We begin to fill in the gaps ourselves. We connect patterns that may or may not be connected. We build narratives around fragments of data. We try to turn uncertainty into structure because the mind resists open-ended confusion. And in that process, mysteries grow larger than the evidence itself. But even after removing speculation, something remains. Too many anomalies across too many environments to ignore entirely. Deep ocean formations that defy natural explanation. Ancient structures that challenge timelines. Atmospheric disturbances that resist classification. And signals, both cosmic and terrestrial, that do not fit established models. Individually, each can be debated. Together, they begin to resemble something more complex. Not random events scattered across reality, but overlapping inconsistencies within a system we have not yet fully mapped. And if that is true, then the real mystery is not what these anomalies are. It is why they appear in the first place. Because in science, repetition usually points to cause. And cause always leads back to something waiting to be understood. We are still standing at the edge of that understanding, looking at fragments, trying to see the shape of something that refuses to reveal itself all at once. And with every new discovery, the outline becomes slightly clearer, but never complete. Some discoveries don't just challenge science. They challenge the idea that we've ever been looking at reality the right way. Because every once in a while, something appears that doesn't fit into any known category. It doesn't behave like nature. It doesn't behave like human design. It sits somewhere in between, as if it belongs to a version of history we were never taught. And the most unsettling part is not what we find. It's how often it keeps happening. In remote regions beneath polar ice, satellite imaging has revealed formations that appear structured. Not random erosion, not scattered geology, but patterns with repetition, spacing, and symmetry that suggest intentional arrangement. Some researchers argue these are illusions created by overlapping scans. Others suggest shifting ice layers creating false geometry. But the problem with those explanations is consistency. The same shapes appear again and again, across different years, different instruments, different conditions. and every time they return with the same structure intact. That is where uncertainty begins to shift into something heavier. Because nature rarely repeats itself with architectural precision. Meanwhile, deep beneath the ocean, vast, unmapped regions continue to reveal unexpected anomalies. Sonar readings occasionally detect straight-line formations cutting across the sea floor, intersecting at sharp angles that do not match typical geological processes. These features span distances too large to easily dismiss as coincidence. Yet no expedition has confirmed their origin directly on site due to extreme depth, pressure, and accessibility limitations. So they remain unresolved, not proven, not disproven. Just recorded and filed under uncertainty. And uncertainty has a way of lingering longer than answers. Even on land, ancient structures continue to raise difficult questions. Massive stone constructions built with precision that still puzzles modern engineers. Blocks weighing tons placed so tightly together that not even a blade can fit between them. Alignments that correspond with astronomical positions that would require advanced observational knowledge. Official history attributes these achievements to gradual development over time. But gradual development leaves traces, intermediate stages, experimental phases, partial progress. In many of these sites, those traces are missing. It is as if the knowledge appeared complete from the beginning, then slowly faded from memory. Across different continents, similar patterns emerge. Pyramidal structures in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and Asia, each built independently, each with distinct cultural meaning, yet all sharing mathematical relationships that suggest a deeper structural similarity. Not identical design, but shared principles. And principles are harder to dismiss than coincidence, because principles imply understanding. And understanding implies transfer of knowledge or parallel discovery of something fundamental about the world. Neither explanation is easy to fully confirm. Then there are the signals that continue to challenge our assumptions about distance and communication. Radio telescopes occasionally detect bursts of energy from deep space that arrive in precise, repeating patterns. Some are classified as natural astrophysical events. Others remain unexplained due to irregular structure or unusual timing. They last milliseconds, but their precision suggests something beyond random emission, something organized, something possibly repeating. Even within Earth's atmosphere, brief anomalies have been recorded where electromagnetic readings spike without clear environmental cause. No storms, no solar activity, no identifiable source, just sudden disturbances that vanish as quickly as they appear. And every time, they leave behind data that cannot be fully reconstructed into a known model. This is where science becomes uncomfortable, not because of what is found, but because of what cannot be placed. Human understanding relies on classification, on defining boundaries between known and unknown, between natural and artificial, between random and intentional. But some phenomena refuse to stay inside those boundaries. They overlap them, blur them, break them apart. And when enough of these anomalies accumulate, a pattern begins to emerge that is not about any single discovery. It is about frequency. How often the unknown repeats itself in different forms. In oceans, in ice, in stone, in space. And when repetition becomes widespread enough, it stops looking like coincidence. It starts looking like structure. Not necessarily structure we understand, but structure nonetheless, which leads to a difficult possibility. That reality may contain layers of organization we have not yet learned to recognize properly. That what we call mystery is not absence of explanation, but incomplete perception of a larger system operating beyond our current awareness. If that is true, then every anomaly is not an isolated event. It is a fragment, a partial glimpse of something much larger that we are only beginning to detect. And the more we look, the more fragments we find. not resolving the picture, but expanding it, until we are no longer asking why these mysteries exist, but how many more are still waiting to be seen. There are moments in science where explanation doesn't fail all at once. It erodes slowly. A theory holds for decades, then one anomaly appears, then another, and another, each one small enough to dismiss on its own. But together, they start to form pressure against everything we thought was settled. And eventually, the question stops being whether something is wrong. It becomes how much we are missing. Deep in the world's oceans, mapping technology continues to reveal structures that challenge simple classification. Long linear formations stretching across the seabed, intersecting angles that resemble deliberate design, repeating patterns that appear in regions separated by thousands of kilometers. Some are cautious in interpretation. They suggest underwater landslides, cracked basalt formations, natural fracturing over time. But nature, even under pressure, rarely produces consistent geometry across vast distances without variation. And here, the variation is strangely absent. The patterns repeat too cleanly, too precisely, as if they are following an unseen blueprint. Above the oceans, in the atmosphere and beyond, similar uncertainties continue to surface. Space-based instruments detect sudden bursts of energy that appear and vanish without warning. Some are traced to known cosmic phenomena. Others resist classification entirely. Their timing does not always align with expected astrophysical behavior. Their structure sometimes suggests repetition, as if the signals are not random emissions, but patterned outputs. Not all scientists agree on their significance, but none can fully ignore them. Because even unanswered data is still data. On land, ancient structures continue to resist simple historical placement. Massive stone monuments built with precision that still challenges modern engineering capabilities. Stones shaped and fitted with tolerances so tight that advanced tools are required to replicate them today. Yet these were created in eras where such tools are not believed to have existed. That contradiction has never been fully resolved. Instead, it is distributed across different explanations. Some suggest lost techniques. Others propose gradual refinement over generations. A few argue that we are underestimating ancient societies entirely. But all explanations face the same problem. They require evidence of progression that is often missing. No clear developmental steps. No intermediate failures. Just final forms that appear suddenly in the archaeological record. And sudden appearance is one of the most difficult patterns to explain in any scientific framework, because it suggests discontinuity, something arriving without visible origin. Even geological records show their own unanswered layers. Ice cores reveal abrupt climate shifts that happened over relatively short periods in Earth's timeline. Fossil records show sudden disappearances of species alongside rapid environmental change. Some of these events are still debated in terms of cause and mechanism. Impact events, volcanic activity, and atmospheric disruptions have all been proposed. But no single explanation accounts for every layer of evidence cleanly. And when explanations fragment, the underlying event remains unresolved. This is where speculation often begins, but science must remain cautious. Because uncertainty does not automatically imply hidden intelligence or external influence. It only indicates incomplete understanding. Still, patterns continue to accumulate. Under the Baltic Sea, repeated sonar anomalies suggest large-scale formations that do not conform to expected geological behavior. In Antarctica, satellite data occasionally reveals shapes beneath ice that appear unusually structured. In desert regions, circular and linear ground patterns emerge that resist simple erosion-based explanations. Individually, each anomaly can be debated. Collectively, they create tension in interpretation, not because they prove anything specific, but because they persist across environments that should not share any direct connection. And persistence is what turns curiosity into investigation. In controlled laboratory environments, researchers also encounter unexpected results. Experiments that fail to replicate under identical conditions. Physical behaviors that shift under slight environmental changes. Data sets that resist stable modeling despite repeated testing. Most of these are eventually resolved, but a small percentage remain partially unexplained, even after extensive review. And those fragments accumulate quietly in scientific literature, forming a background layer of uncertainty that rarely reaches public attention. Outside of formal science, historical records and oral traditions add another dimension to the mystery. Stories of knowledge appearing suddenly. Descriptions of advanced understanding attributed to external sources, divine figures, or unknown origins. While mythology is not evidence, its repetition across cultures raises interesting questions about shared human interpretation of unexplained experiences. Why do similar patterns of narrative appear independently across distant civilizations? Why do ancient texts so often describe descent, arrival, instruction, and disappearance? These are not answers, but they are recurring questions. And recurring questions tend to signal unresolved structure in understanding. At the center of all this lies a deeper issue. Human perception is built to find order, to organize chaos into systems that can be understood, predicted, and controlled. But when systems exceed our ability to fully map them, perception begins to compensate. We simplify. We categorize. We dismiss outliers, until enough outliers remain that they can no longer be ignored. And then the structure begins to shift, not into certainty, but into something more uncomfortable. Recognition that the system may be larger than our current models allow. At that point, every anomaly takes on new weight, not as isolated mystery, but as part of a larger, incomplete picture. A picture we are still assembling without knowing what the final image is supposed to look like. And perhaps that is the most important part. Not the answers we find, but the realization that we are still only seeing fragments. And the full structure, whatever it is still out there, waiting for the next piece to be uncovered. There are discoveries that don't just expand knowledge, they disturb it, because they don't arrive as answers to questions we were already asking. They appear as contradictions to things we thought were already settled. And once those contradictions enter the record, they don't disappear easily. They linger, they repeat, and eventually they start to connect. Deep within Earth's polar regions, modern satellite systems continue to capture anomalies beneath layers of ice that are thousands of meters thick. These are not random distortions or brief glitches. They are recurring shapes, long formations, structured outlines that appear too organized to be purely geological in nature. Some researchers suggest shifting ice sheets can create illusions of geometry. Others propose imaging artifacts caused by data compression or overlapping scans. But what makes these cases difficult to dismiss is repetition, because the same structures appear in different data sets collected years apart. Different satellites, different conditions, same patterns. And nature, as far as we understand it, rarely repeats complex geometry with such consistency. Meanwhile, beneath the world's oceans, mapping technology continues to reveal unusual formations on the seafloor. Some appear as long, linear trenches that intersect at precise angles. Others resemble clustered grid-like patterns spread across wide distances. At first glance, they resemble nothing more than geological fractures. But closer analysis shows inconsistencies in scale, alignment, and distribution that challenge simple classification. Geological processes tend to be irregular, shaped by pressure, erosion, and time. But these formations sometimes appear too ordered, too deliberate, as if they follow a logic that is not random. Even within space, where distances are vast and signals faint, unexplained patterns continue to emerge. Radio telescopes occasionally detect bursts of energy that repeat in structured intervals. Some are traced to known astrophysical sources. Others remain unclassified due to their irregular timing and structure. They are brief, sometimes lasting only milliseconds, but their patterning suggests something beyond chaotic emission, something structured in repetition. And repetition always raises questions about origin. On Earth, ancient structures continue to add another layer to this mystery. Megalithic sites built with precision that still challenges modern reconstruction techniques. Massive stones positioned with alignment that often corresponds to astronomical events with surprising accuracy. In some cases, the tools required to achieve such precision are not believed to have existed during the time these structures were built. Yet the results remain solid, measurable, real. This creates a contradiction that historians and engineers continue to explore from different angles. Some attribute it to lost techniques or underestimated ingenuity. Others suggest gradual evolution of methods that were not fully preserved in the archaeological record. But neither explanation fully resolves the absence of transitional evidence in many cases. Because between early development and final construction, there is often a gap, a silence in the record, a missing sequence of steps. And missing steps are often more revealing than completed ones. Even biological history carries its own unresolved transitions. The fossil record shows periods of rapid change where species appear or disappear over relatively short geological timeframes. While many of these events are explained through environmental shifts, extinction pressures, or evolutionary adaptation, some transitions remain debated due to incomplete data. Extinction events, climate shifts, and geological disruptions all contribute to these gaps. But the timing of certain changes still raises questions that are not fully resolved. And when multiple disciplines begin to show similar patterns of incomplete transition, curiosity naturally deepens. Because it suggests that fragmentation is not limited to one field of study. It appears across many. In geology, in archaeology, in astronomy, in atmospheric science. Each discipline finds its own anomalies. Each builds its own explanations. But rarely do those explanations intersect into a single unified model. And yet the anomalies themselves continue to echo similarities. Geometry where it should not exist. Signals that repeat without known source. Structures that appear fully formed without visible development. This raises a difficult possibility. Not that any single mystery is unsolvable, but that they may not be separate mysteries at all. Instead, they may be different expressions of the same underlying phenomenon, viewed through different scientific lenses. If that is the case, then the challenge is not just explanation. It is recognition. Recognizing the pattern that connects them. But recognition is only possible when enough of the pattern is visible. And right now, what we have are fragments. Scattered across time, space, and discipline. Each one incomplete on its own, but persistent enough to suggest structure beyond coincidence. So the question slowly shifts, away from what each anomaly means individually, and towards something larger. What kind of system produces signals in the deep ocean, geometric structures beneath ice, ancient architectural precision, and cosmic bursts that repeat in pattern? We do not yet have a definitive answer, but we do have accumulation. And accumulation, in science, is often the first sign that something larger is forming beneath the surface of understanding. Not visible yet, not fully defined, but increasingly difficult to ignore. And as more data arrives, the outline becomes slightly clearer, not as certainty, but as pattern. And pattern is where every major shift in understanding begins. There are moments in science when the biggest shift doesn't come from a new discovery. It comes from realizing that the old assumptions were never complete to begin with. Because once you start looking closely at the edges of what we know, you begin to notice something unsettling. The world is not full of isolated mysteries. It is full of repeating ones. And repetition is never just coincidence for long. Deep beneath the Arctic and Antarctic ice sheets, satellite imaging continues to reveal formations that do not behave like typical geology. Some appear as long, structured lines. Others form curved boundaries that intersect in ways that resemble intentional layouts. What makes these findings difficult to dismiss is not just their shape, but their persistence. Year after year, different scans reveal the same underlying structures. Even when resolution improves, the patterns don't disappear. They become clearer, as if they were always there, just waiting to be seen properly. Scientists often caution against over-interpreting satellite artifacts. Ice movement, shadow distortion, and sensor overlap can all produce misleading visuals. That is true. But what is harder to explain is why similar artifacts keep appearing in the same regions across unrelated datasets collected by independent teams. At some point, coincidence stops being a satisfying explanation. Beneath the oceans, another layer of uncertainty continues to grow. High-resolution sonar mapping has uncovered vast stretches of seafloor with unusual linear patterns. Some are extremely long, extending beyond typical geological fracture zones. Others intersect at sharp angles that seem too structured for natural formation alone. Geological processes can create straight lines, yes. Faults can fracture in patterns. Sediment can settle in unusual ways. But large-scale repetition of geometry across different ocean basins becomes harder to dismiss as purely natural randomness, especially when similar patterns are reported in regions that are geologically unrelated. This is where interpretation begins to divide. Some researchers maintain that we are simply seeing the limits of current geological models. Others suggest unknown underwater processes that have not yet been fully studied. And a smaller group of theories explores something more speculative, that we are not looking at isolated formations at all, but remnants of a much older system. Meanwhile, in deep space, radio telescopes continue to detect fast bursts of energy that challenge simple classification. Some originate from distant galaxies. Others repeat in patterns that suggest structure rather than randomness. Most are explained through extreme astrophysical events like neutron star activity or black hole interactions. And in many cases, that explanation is valid. But not all signals fit neatly into those categories. A few remain irregular. Their timing, repetition, or frequency patterns do not align perfectly with known natural models. They do not prove anything unusual on their own, but they add to a growing collection of unresolved data points. And unresolved data has a way of accumulating meaning over time. On Earth's surface, ancient monuments continue to raise questions that cannot be answered by construction records alone. Massive stone structures built with precision alignment toward celestial bodies. Sites arranged in geometric patterns that reflect astronomical cycles. In some cases, the methods used to achieve such precision remain unclear based on the tools and knowledge attributed to those time periods. This has led to ongoing debate in archaeology, not about whether these structures exist, but about how they were achieved, and whether our assumptions about technological capability in ancient societies are incomplete. Across different continents, similar architectural principles appear independently. Not identical designs, but recurring ideas. Alignment, proportion, symbolic geometry tied to celestial observation. The repetition of these principles raises an important question. Is this convergence purely cultural, or does it reflect something deeper about human understanding of the environment and sky? Even within modern scientific research, unexpected anomalies continue to surface. Experiments that produce results which cannot be consistently replicated under identical conditions. Environmental readings that fluctuate without identifiable cause. Instrumentation that detects temporary disturbances in electromagnetic fields without corresponding external events. Most of these anomalies are eventually resolved through deeper analysis. but a small fraction remain partially unexplained. Not enough to overturn established science, but enough to remain open questions. And open questions tend to resurface, because they are never fully closed. Across all these domains, one pattern becomes increasingly difficult to ignore: the presence of structure where randomness is expected, and the presence of repetition where uniqueness should dominate. This does not immediately imply hidden intelligence or external design. Science requires caution in interpretation. Patterns can emerge naturally under conditions we do not yet fully understand. But it does suggest that our current models may not be capturing the full complexity of the systems we are observing. And that possibility alone is significant, because it means the unknown is not confined to one field. It is distributed across many: geology, oceanography, astronomy, archaeology, physics. Each discipline sees its own version of the same underlying problem: incomplete explanation at the edges of observation. And when those edges begin to overlap, a larger question emerges. Not about individual anomalies, but about the framework we use to interpret them. If reality is producing repeated patterns across unrelated systems, then those systems may not be as independent as they appear, or we may simply not yet understand the deeper rules connecting them. Either way, the implication is the same. We are still missing context. And without context, even accurate data can feel fragmented. So what we are left with is not a conclusion, but a buildup. Layer upon layer of unresolved observations, each adding weight to the idea that something larger is operating just beyond the limits of current understanding. Not visible all at once, but emerging slowly, across different places, different times, and different fields of study. And as each new anomaly appears, the pattern does not become clearer in definition. It becomes larger in scope, until eventually, the question is no longer what any single mystery means, but what kind of reality produces so many of them in the first place. There is a point in every investigation where the evidence stops feeling like separate clues and starts feeling like pressure. Not the kind you can measure on a scale, but the kind that builds quietly when too many things refuse to fit where they are supposed to. At first, each anomaly feels manageable. A strange sonar image here, an unusual signal there, a structure that doesn't quite match historical expectations somewhere else. Individually, they can all be explained away, but together, they begin to behave differently. They start pointing in the same direction. Deep under the ocean floor, mapping systems continue to reveal formations that defy simple categorization. Long linear stretches that run for distances too great to ignore. Sharp transitions in direction that resemble intentional planning rather than natural fracture. Geologists often remind us that nature is capable of surprising complexity. That pressure, time, and shifting tectonic forces can create patterns that appear structured even when they are not. That is true. But what is harder to explain is repetition across unrelated zones. Different oceans, different depths, different geological histories. And still, similar patterns appear. Not identical, but consistent enough to raise questions that don't easily disappear. Above the oceans, in the frozen extremes of Earth, satellite imaging continues to reveal unusual geometric impressions beneath ice sheets. Some appear as faint grids, others as elongated shapes with boundaries that look too precise for random formation. These observations are often attributed to visual distortion or data compression artifacts. And in some cases, that explanation holds. But when multiple independent scans over time show the same structures reappearing in the same regions, the idea of coincidence becomes harder to rely on. Because repetition reduces randomness, and reduction of randomness increases meaning, even if that meaning is not yet understood. In space, the situation becomes even more complex. Radio telescopes continue to capture bursts of energy from distant sources that arrive in structured intervals. Some follow known astrophysical models, others do not. There are signals that repeat in patterns too orderly to be dismissed as pure chaos, yet too distant and incomplete to be fully interpreted. Scientists remain cautious, as they should. The universe is full of extreme events that can mimic structure without intention. But caution does not eliminate curiosity. And curiosity grows when patterns refuse to break. On Earth's surface, ancient structures continue to challenge modern expectations of historical development. Massive constructions built from stones weighing multiple tons, shaped and positioned with precision that still demands advanced engineering to replicate today. The mystery is not just their existence. It is the consistency of their precision across civilizations that had no known contact with each other. Different continents, different cultures, different time periods. Yet, similar architectural logic appears again and again. Alignment with celestial bodies, use of geometric proportion, construction methods that prioritize durability and symmetry at a scale that suggests long-term planning. Historians explain these similarities through convergent development, independent societies arriving at similar solutions to similar problems. That explanation is valid in many cases, but it becomes less comfortable when the similarities extend beyond function and into detailed structural choices that appear unexpectedly aligned. And when explanations begin to feel stretched, the mind naturally searches for something deeper. Not necessarily a conspiracy, but a connection we haven't yet mapped correctly. Even in biological history, the record is not without gaps that resist simple explanation. Periods where species appear or disappear in ways that suggest rapid environmental change, sudden ecological pressure, or incomplete fossil preservation. Most of these transitions can be explained through known processes over long time scales, but some remain debated. Not because science lacks tools, but because the record itself is incomplete. And incomplete records always leave space for interpretation. Across all these domains, something subtle begins to emerge. Not a single unanswered question, but a pattern of unanswered questions that resemble each other in structure. They are not identical, but they share a quality. They resist final closure. They remain open even after investigation. And open systems tend to accumulate attention over time, because the human mind is built to close loops, to resolve uncertainty, to finish patterns. But some patterns do not close easily. They expand. The deeper you go into modern scientific data, the more this expansion becomes noticeable. Small anomalies that once seemed isolated are now part of larger data sets. Patterns in ocean mapping echo patterns in atmospheric readings. Geological anomalies mirror structural irregularities found in remote satellite imagery. No single field owns the mystery. It is distributed, and distribution makes it harder to contain. At this point, interpretation becomes the most difficult part of all, because interpretation requires boundaries. And these anomalies do not respect boundaries between disciplines. They cross them, quietly, repeatedly, without explanation, which leads to a question that is no longer about any one discovery, but about the system that produces them. If unrelated environments continue producing similar structural anomalies, then either the underlying processes are more connected than we currently understand, or our models are missing a layer of complexity that spans across multiple domains. Neither answer is simple. Both are unsettling in different ways. And so the evidence continues to accumulate without resolution, not because it is ignored, but because it does not yet fit into a single coherent framework. And in science, what does not fit is not discarded. It is held, waiting for the moment when enough fragments align to reveal something larger, something not yet fully visible, something that may already be shaping the way we interpret reality, even if we cannot clearly see it yet. And until that moment arrives, all we have are fragments, scattered across oceans, ice, stone, and space, each one pointing towards something just beyond reach. Not complete, not explained, but undeniably present. What if the world you think you understand is only a thin layer covering something far older, far stranger, and still active beneath your feet? Because deep in forgotten archives, buried ocean floors, sealed temples, and unexplained signals from space, patterns begin to repeat. Not random, not isolated, but connected in ways science has not fully explained. And in this chapter, we move into a place where those connections become impossible to ignore. It begins with the ocean. In the mid-1990s, hydrophones placed across the Pacific recorded something that should not have been possible. A sound so powerful it was detected across thousands of kilometers. It was low, rhythmic, and almost organic. Scientists labeled it an ice quake, but the signal did not behave like ice breaking. It carried structure, almost like a call, almost like a response. Years later, a similar signal returned. Fainter, more fragmented, but unmistakably related. Not a repetition of nature, but something that suggested intention. Something that raised a question no one wanted to fully answer. If the ocean is speaking, who or what is listening back? Then there is the matter of what lies beneath the ocean itself. Satellite scans have revealed strange geometric formations on the seafloor. Massive grid-like structures stretching for miles. Right angles where nature should produce curves. Patterns resembling roads, foundations, and divided zones. At first dismissed as sensor errors, the formations reappeared in multiple independent scans. Different equipment, different years, same geometry. No official excavation has ever been conducted in those exact regions. And that silence has only fueled speculation. Because history is full of structures that should not exist according to the timelines we were given. Ancient megaliths aligned with celestial maps. Pyramids positioned with mathematical precision that still challenges modern engineering. Sites that seem to mirror star systems, as if the builders were not only observing the sky, but encoding it. Some researchers argue these are coincidences. Others point out that coincidence loses meaning when repetition becomes too precise. And then there are the anomalies that do not fit any category at all. In remote regions of satellite imaging, circular depressions appear and vanish depending on lighting and angle. Underwater scans reveal shapes that resemble artificial platforms buried under sediment layers believed to be millions of years old. And in some cases, magnetic readings suggest hollow structures beneath solid rock where no caverns should exist. Each discovery on its own can be explained away, but together they form something harder to dismiss. A pattern of interruption in the natural record. Even more disturbing are the reports that never reach formal publication. Independent explorers, drone operators, and maritime survey teams have occasionally described encountering organized layouts in unexplored terrain. Straight corridors, segmented zones, repeating structural logic, and then, almost always, signal loss, equipment failure, or unexplained data corruption that erases raw recordings. No official explanation has been confirmed, and so the records remain fragmented. But fragmentation itself becomes part of the pattern, because across every continent, in every layer of investigation, there is a recurring theme. Evidence appears, reaches the edge of confirmation, and then disappears from the chain of study. Not always dramatically, sometimes quietly. A missing file, a discontinued project, a classified label that arrives without explanation. This is where speculation begins to fill the gaps. Some suggest natural geological processes capable of creating illusions of structure. Others point to the limitations of remote sensing technology. But a growing number of independent researchers propose a different idea, that we are not looking at isolated mysteries, but remnants of something older than recorded civilization, something partially erased, partially buried, and still influencing the environment in subtle ways. And if that is true, then the implications are not small, because it means the surface of history we rely on may not be complete, that entire chapters of development could exist beneath layers of time, sediment, and deliberate forgetting. There are even ancient texts that hint at cycles rather than beginnings. Civilizations rising, advancing, and then collapsing under conditions not fully understood, followed by new civilizations that inherit fragments of knowledge without knowing their origin. Echoes instead of continuity. And in those echoes, patterns repeat again and again. Geometry, astronomy, monumental construction, symbolic language tied to celestial motion. It appears across cultures that should not have been connected, which leads to a final unsettling question. If knowledge appears without transmission, where does it come from? We return again to the ocean, to the unexplained sound, to the grids beneath the sea floor, to the structures that should not exist in the timelines we have built. And we are left with only one consistent observation. Something is there, not fully understood, not fully revealed, but persistent enough to leave traces across time, geography, and science itself. And as exploration continues, each discovery does not close the mystery. It expands it. Because the deeper we look, the more it feels like we are not uncovering new information. We are rediscovering something that was never meant to be lost. What if some of the most famous mysteries in human history were never meant to be solved in isolation, because they were never separate in the first place? Across the world, scattered like broken pieces of a single forgotten design, there are anomalies that refuse to behave like normal history. A structure here, a signal there, a pattern that repeats in places that were never supposed to share any connection. And when you start placing those pieces side by side, something uncomfortable begins to emerge. A larger picture that doesn't fit what we were taught. In the previous chapters, we touched the ocean signals, the geometric seafloor formations, and the ancient monuments aligned with impossible precision. But there is another layer to this mystery that sits closer to human experience. Something more physical, more direct. It is the strange behavior of ancient construction itself. Across continents, there are structures built with stone blocks so massive that modern machinery would struggle to move them. Some of these blocks are fitted so precisely that not even a blade can pass between them. No mortar, no visible gaps, just weight, balance, and alignment that feels beyond trial and error. The question is not only how they were built, it is why they all follow similar principles. From South America to Egypt to parts of Asia, ancient builders seemed obsessed with the same ideas. Monumental scale, astronomical alignment, durability that defies erosion patterns, and in many cases, positioning that reflects celestial systems with surprising accuracy. Independent cultures, similar outcomes. That alone raises questions science is still trying to fully answer. But the mystery deepens when you examine what surrounds these sites rather than just the structures themselves. In multiple excavation zones, researchers have reported finding layers that do not match expected timelines. Tool marks that suggest different levels of technological capability existing side by side. Geological disruptions that hint at rapid environmental changes rather than gradual development. And in some rare cases, entire sections of sites appear to have been deliberately buried. Not collapsed, not destroyed by nature, but covered in a way that suggests intention, as if something was being hidden. One of the most controversial ideas in modern archaeology is the possibility that human civilization did not begin once, but multiple times. That advanced societies may have risen before recorded history, only to disappear due to catastrophic events that reset progress. Flood narratives appear in nearly every ancient culture. Fire and sky destruction myths appear globally. Stories of knowledge being lost, then rediscovered, repeat with strange consistency across unrelated civilizations. And while mythology is often dismissed as symbolic storytelling, the sheer repetition of core events across time and geography makes it difficult to ignore entirely. Then, there are the physical anomalies that do not fit any simple narrative. In certain deep underground layers, carbon dating produces conflicting results depending on the sample location. Some materials appear far older than the surrounding strata should allow. Others seem out of place entirely, as if inserted into layers they do not belong to. In underwater regions near continental shelves, sonar mapping has revealed straight linear formations beneath sediment that is estimated to be thousands of years old. In some cases, these formations resemble road networks. In others, they form rectangular grids that suggest planning rather than erosion. And yet, official exploration of many of these sites remains limited. Not always due to lack of interest, but often due to practical constraints, environmental conditions, or restricted access zones that are not publicly explained in detail. This is where interpretation becomes divided. Some researchers argue that natural geological processes are far more capable of producing structured illusions than previously understood. Others believe we are missing critical data that could explain these formations without invoking lost civilizations or advanced prehistoric societies. But there is a third perspective gaining quiet attention: that these anomalies are not proof of a single hidden truth, but fragments of multiple truths layered on top of each other. Natural formations that mimic structure, human structures altered by time, ancient sites built on even older foundations, and environmental events that periodically reshape what remains visible. A layered history rather than a linear one. And if that is true, then the idea of a single origin point for civilization may be too simple. Because the deeper we investigate, the more the evidence refuses to stay in neat categories. Even in modern times, unexplained patterns continue to appear in data that should be fully understood. Satellite anomalies that vanish upon closer inspection. Oceanic readings that fluctuate in ways that cannot be replicated in controlled environments. Electromagnetic disturbances that correlate loosely with geographic regions tied to ancient construction. Individually, none of this proves anything definitive. But together, it creates a persistent tension between explanation and observation. And that tension is where mystery survives. One of the most unsettling aspects of all this is not what we have found, but what we might be overlooking. Entire regions of the ocean remain unmapped in detail. Large portions of Earth's subsurface remain unexamined at high resolution. Even well-known archaeological sites are often studied only in sections, leaving gaps in full structural understanding. The unknown is not rare. It is still the majority. And within that majority, anomalies are bound to exist. But anomalies become more significant when they repeat across unrelated systems. Ocean grids, ancient megaliths, unexplained signals, geometric alignments, sudden disappearances of data, cultural myths that echo each other across continents. At some point, the question stops being whether each mystery is real, and starts becoming whether they are connected. Because if they are, then we are not dealing with separate events scattered across history. We are dealing with a single, incomplete narrative that has been fragmented over time. And perhaps the most important part of that narrative is not what we have discovered, but what remains just out of reach, waiting for the next layer of evidence to surface. Until then, the pattern continues. Quiet, persistent, unfinished. If this is the final chapter, then the question is simple but uncomfortable. What happens when a mystery refuses to end? Because by now we have moved through oceans that seem to speak in coded sound, seafloors that resemble engineered grids, ancient monuments aligned with impossible precision, and anomalies that appear across time like echoes of something older than recorded history. Each one, on its own, could be dismissed. But together, they start to behave differently. Like fragments of a single message scattered across different languages. And the most disturbing part is not what we have found. It is what we still cannot explain even after centuries of study. Modern science has given us extraordinary tools. We can map the ocean floor, scan deep underground structures, and analyze ancient materials at atomic levels. We can reconstruct past climates, track cosmic signals, and model geological changes across millions of years. And yet, despite all of this, certain patterns refuse to resolve. They persist. In 1997, a powerful underwater signal was recorded in the Pacific. It lasted only minutes, but its strength was so extreme that it was detected across thousands of kilometers. It did not match known marine life, and it did not behave like a typical geological event. Years later, a similar signal appeared again, weaker but familiar in structure. No confirmed source was ever identified. Then there are the geometric formations beneath the ocean. Not one isolated case, but multiple regions showing structured patterns that resemble grids, right angles, and segmented layouts. Natural erosion rarely produces consistent geometry at this scale, yet the data remains unresolved. In parallel, ancient sites across the world continue to challenge timelines. Structures that appear too advanced for their supposed era. Construction methods that remain difficult to replicate even with modern equipment. And alignments that suggest a deep understanding of astronomy long before formal scientific models existed. Some researchers argue this is coincidence shaped by interpretation. Others suggest lost knowledge. A smaller group proposes something more unsettling, that we are not looking at isolated civilizations, but at a repeating cycle of discovery, loss, and reconstruction. A pattern where knowledge rises, fragments, and returns in altered form. Across mythologies worldwide, there are references to great floods, fires from the sky, long periods of darkness, and the survival of small groups who rebuild afterward. These stories are often treated as symbolic, but their global repetition raises a question that refuses to disappear completely. Why do so many cultures describe similar catastrophic resets? And why do they all begin again with similar themes? Monument building, astronomical observation, complex social structures, symbolic language tied to the sky. It is as if humanity keeps restarting from a shared template. But even this idea struggles against the limits of evidence. Because while patterns exist, direct continuity does not. There is no single thread that clearly connects every era. Only traces. And traces are always open to interpretation. That is why these mysteries remain alive. Not because we lack intelligence, but because the evidence exists in a space where certainty cannot fully form. Even the Earth itself contributes to the confusion. Geological layers do not always behave like clean historical records. Disturbances, shifts, and compression events can rearrange timelines in ways that blur the boundary between periods. Entire landscapes can be reshaped, buried, and re-exposed over vast stretches of time. So the question becomes more complex. Are we missing evidence of lost civilizations? Or are we misreading the natural processes that shaped the planet? Or is it possible that both explanations are partially true at the same time? And then there is the most uncomfortable possibility of all, that the answers are not missing. They are simply not recognizable in their current form, because recognition depends on perspective, and perspective is limited by what we already believe to be possible. Throughout history, every generation has believed it was close to understanding everything essential about the world. And every generation has eventually discovered something that forced it to expand that belief. Unknown forces in the deep ocean, unexplained signals from space, structures buried beneath ice, civilizations that appear suddenly in the archaeological record without clear precursors. Each discovery expands the boundary of knowledge but never closes the gaps completely. Instead, it reveals new ones, which leads to the final reflection of this entire journey. Maybe the purpose of these mysteries is not to be solved in the traditional sense. Maybe they exist to remind us that the map of reality is still incomplete, that beneath every layer of certainty, there is another layer waiting, and beneath that, another, until eventually, we realize that understanding is not a destination. It is an ongoing process shaped by what we have not yet discovered. So when we look back at the ocean signals, the buried grids, the ancient monuments, and the unexplained alignments, we are not just seeing isolated mysteries. We are seeing the edges of something larger, something that has not fully revealed its structure yet. And until it does, the only honest conclusion is this: the world is not finished telling its story. Subscribe now for more dark mystery documentaries, ancient secrets, unexplained discoveries, and chilling unsolved cases from around the world.